Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was halfway through the server upgrade when I saw the first timestamp. It was around 1:40 a.m., the kind of dead hour where even the base feels like it's asleep. I'd been contracted to help replace some aging infrastructure in one of the internal systems. Nothing classified on my end, just hardware swaps, firmware updates, making sure things didn't crash when they flipped everything back online. The server room I was working in sat below ground level, tucked behind two badge access doors and a biometric scanner that barely worked half the time. Cold air, constant hum, rows of racks blinking quietly. Standard setup. I was running a basic integrity check after a partial reboot when I noticed it, just a line in the log that didn't belong. External handshake initiated. I frowned at it, mostly because the timestamp didn't make sense. It hadn't happened yet. My system clock read 0143. I figured it was left over from a previous log cycle. Happens sometimes if buffers don't clear properly during updates. I scrolled back through the entries. Same line appeared again. Different date. Zoo Petit. External handshake initiated. And again, every single day. Same exact time, same exact wording, no variation, no follow-up entries. Just that one line, sitting there like it didn't care if anyone noticed it or not. I leaned back in the chair, rubbing my eyes. Maybe it was a test ping. Some internal protocol I wasn't cleared to understand. But the phrase external handshake bothered me. Nothing external should have been able to touch this system. That was the whole point of the network isolation. Air-gapped, locked down, no inbound connections. I'd been briefed on that at least 3 times before they let me into the room. I checked the network activity logs. No traffic at 2:17 on any of the recorded days. No packet spikes, no port activity, nothing. Just silence. The system showed an event, but no evidence it had actually happened. That didn't sit right. I opened a separate console and ran a live monitor, just to see if anything would trigger when the time rolled over. I wasn't planning on staying that late, but curiosity got the better of me. Around 2:05, the hum of the server rack seemed louder than usual. Not actually louder, just more noticeable. The room felt colder, too, like the AC had kicked up a notch. I checked the wall panel, same temperature as always. At 2:16, I stopped typing and just watched the screen. The seconds ticked down. 2:16, bling. The log updated instantly. External handshake initiated. I waited for something else to appear. A connection record, a response, anything. Nothing. The cursor blinked. The room hummed. That was it. I checked the network monitor again. No change. No activity. I ran a trace command, just in case there was a delayed response. Nothing. It was like the system was acknowledging something that didn't exist. I stayed another 10 minutes, just staring at the logs, waiting for anything to follow that entry. But it never did. It just sat there. Another identical line added to the list. I told myself it was a glitch, some outdated script that ran on a timer. Maybe a legacy system that hadn't been properly removed. But then I noticed something else. The timestamps were perfect, down to the second. No drift, no jitter. That's rare, even in well-maintained systems. Clocks slip, microseconds add up, but these entries were exact, every day, same time, no variation. That meant whatever was triggering it wasn't part of the normal system clock cycle. I flagged it in my notes, didn't file a formal report, just wrote it down for later. The next night I checked again, same thing. External handshake initiated. I ran deeper diagnostics that time, dug into the system processes, looking for anything that might explain it. No scheduled tasks, no cron jobs, no hidden services, nothing that should have been generating that line. I even disconnected part of the internal network, isolating a few racks just to see if the event would still log. It did. Same time, same message. That was when I started to feel uneasy, not scared, just off. Like I was looking at something I wasn't supposed to understand. On the third night, I decided to push it further. At 2:16, I opened a command prompt and tried to intercept whatever this handshake was. Set up a listening port, ran a passive scan, anything that might catch a signal. When the clock hit 2:17, the log updated. External handshake initiated via, and for a split second, barely noticeable, the command prompt flickered. Just a blink. Then it was normal again. I checked the output. Nothing had been captured. No packets, no incoming requests, no data at all. But I knew something had happened. The flicker wasn't part of the system behavior. It felt external, like something had brushed against the system without fully connecting. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the screen. External handshake, I said out loud, just to hear it. The words didn't make sense anymore. Who was it handshaking with? There was no external network, no incoming connections, no outside signals allowed. And yet every night at exactly 2:17, something reached in, or at least the system thought it did. I finally decided to report it. Next morning, I mentioned it to a supervisor named Klein. Mid-level guy, always looked like he hadn't slept enough. Probably a logging error, he said without really listening. I checked for that, I said. It's consistent. Every day. Same time. He nodded slowly, like he was processing it, but his eyes had already drifted to something else on his desk. I'll take a look, he said. That was the end of the conversation. Later that day, I went back to the server room to continue the upgrade work. My access badge didn't work. I tried again. Red light. A security guard I hadn't seen before stepped over. You're reassigned, he said. Reassigned to what? Different wing. Why? He didn't answer. I found Klein again, asked him what was going on. Project scope changed, he said, not meeting my eyes. You're needed elsewhere. That log issue, did you look at it? He paused for just a fraction of a second, then shook his head. Not my department. That didn't make sense. It was his department. I didn't push it. Didn't feel like something I should push. They moved me to a different building that afternoon. Smaller job, less access, no direct connection to the systems I'd been working on. That night, out of habit, I checked my watch around 2:17. I don't know why. I just did. And for a moment, just a moment, I felt the same thing I'd felt in the server room. A subtle shift. Like something had happened, just outside of reach. I don't have access to those logs anymore. Haven't seen them since. But sometimes when I'm up late, I catch myself glancing at the clock, waiting for it to hit 2:17. Not because I expect to see anything, just because part of me still wonders what was reaching in and why it only needed a second to do it. We were already halfway out there when dispatch updated the coordinates. I was riding shotgun in a dust-beaten government pickup with a guy named Ellison driving, both of us part of a small recovery crew that handled weather balloons and stray equipment that drifted too close to restricted airspace. It wasn't exciting work, mostly chasing down tangled fabric and busted sensors that landed miles from anywhere. That morning had started like any other. Cold, clear sky, sun just starting to burn off the pale blue haze sitting over the desert. Dispatch said an object had dropped fast, faster than a typical balloon descent, and landed somewhere near the outer edge of restricted land. That alone was unusual. Balloons don't just drop, they drift, they sag, they tear. They don't come straight down. Maybe it popped high, Ellison said, shrugging as he steered around a stretch of cracked earth. Even then, I said, it wouldn't hit like that. He didn't answer. We both knew it didn't add up. About 10 minutes later, we saw the dust plume. Not rising, settling, like something heavy had already landed and disturbed the ground, leaving a lingering haze that hadn't quite faded. The coordinates matched. We slowed down instinctively, even though there was no one else out there. Then we saw the vehicles, 2 matte black SUVs parked in a loose perims off. No markings, no visible plates. Just sitting there in the open like they'd been waiting for us. That's new, Ellison muttered. We pulled up about 50 yards out. Neither of us got out right away. Something about the scene felt staged, like we were arriving late to something we weren't supposed to see. 3 men stood near the center of the site. No uniforms, just plain clothes, dark jackets, boots, neutral colors. They weren't looking at the ground or the sky. They were watching us. Ellison finally killed the engine. "Let's just do our job," he said, but his voice was tighter than usual. We stepped out into the cold air. The wind was light, but it carried a faint smell. Sharp, almost metallic. Not like fuel, not like burnt rubber, something cleaner, colder. As we walked closer, I noticed the ground. There was a circle, perfectly round, maybe 30 feet across. The sand inside it looked darker, slightly compacted like it had been pressed down uniformly. But it wasn't scorched the way you'd expect. No ash, no charring, just a subtle change in texture and color, like the heat had touched it without burning it. Outside the circle, the desert looked normal. Scrub, loose sand, scattered rocks. Inside, everything was still. No wind movement, no shifting dust. "Stay out of that," one of the men said as we approached. He didn't raise his voice, didn't step toward us, just said it like a fact. Ellison nodded. "We're here for the recovery." "It's already been handled," the man said. That didn't make sense. Dispatch had sent us. If someone else got there first, we should have been told to stand down. "What was it?" I asked. The man looked at me for a second longer than necessary. "Debris." "From a balloon?" Ellison added. "From altitude," he said. That wasn't an answer. Behind them, I saw the crate. It sat just inside the edge of the circle. A heavy-duty transport case, military grade, the kind used for sensitive equipment. Dark gray, reinforced corners, sealed tight. No labels, no markings. It looked out of place, like it had been dropped there along with whatever they'd put inside it. "What condition was it in?" I asked, nodding toward the crate. "Contained," the man said. I took a few steps to the side, trying to get a better angle without crossing into the circle. The air felt colder closer to the edge. Not dramatically, but enough that I noticed it, like stepping near an open freezer. "Did you log the impact?" Ellison asked. "We have it covered." That was the third non-answer. I crouched slightly, looking at the sand along the boundary of the circle. It wasn't melted, not fused into glass like you'd see with a lightning strike or extreme heat. It just looked compressed, like something had pushed down evenly across the entire area at once. No central impact point, no crater, no debris scattered outward. Whatever came down hadn't hit the ground the way things usually do. I stood back up. There's no burn pattern. The man closest to the crate shifted slightly, blocking my view of it more directly. "It's not your concern." Ellison gave me a quick look. Drop it, but I couldn't. Not yet. "How did it come down?" I asked. The man paused like he was deciding whether to answer. Then he said, "Fast." That didn't help. I glanced up at the sky out of instinct. It was clear. No trails. No sign of anything having fallen from above. Just that empty blue that stretched forever. One of the other men walked toward the SUV and opened the rear door. Inside, I caught a glimpse of equipment cases. More crates like the one on the ground. They'd come prepared. "You can report that the recovery was completed prior to your arrival," the first man said. "No further action required." Ellison nodded again. "We'll need something for the log." "You'll get it," he said. There was a moment of silence after that. The wind picked up slightly, brushing the edge of the circle. But inside it, the sand didn't move. It just sat there, undisturbed. I took one more look at the crate. For a split second, I thought I saw something shift along the seam. Just a slight ripple, like the surface of the case wasn't entirely rigid. But when I focused on it, it looked solid again. Maybe it was the light. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks. Still, something about it didn't sit right. We turned back toward the truck without another word. As we walked away, I felt that cold patch of air fade gradually, like stepping out of shade into sunlight. Neither of us spoke until we were back on the road. "That wasn't a balloon," Ellison said finally. "No," I said. We drove in silence after that. When we got back to the office, the report was already waiting. Pre-filled. Signed off. It listed the object as standard atmospheric equipment failure, recovered without incident, no mention of the circle, no mention of the other personnel. Ellison looked at me, then at the report. "You gonna argue it?" he asked. I shook my head. I signed it. Later that night, I checked the coordinates again. Satellite imagery from earlier that day showed nothing unusual. No circle, no vehicles, no disturbance in the terrain. Just untouched desert, like nothing had ever landed there at all. I was already an hour into the flight when I noticed it. Nothing unusual at first, just a clean afternoon over the Nevada desert. That pale, washed-out blue sky you get when the heat's been sitting on the ground all day. I was flying a rented Cessna 182 out of a small regional field, just doing a loop along the edge of restricted airspace. Perfectly legal route. I'd filed everything properly, stayed well outside the boundary. I wasn't trying to get close to anything sensitive. The air was smooth, almost too smooth. No turbulence, no crosswinds, just a steady hum from the engine and the occasional crackle from the radio. Visibility was excellent, miles in every direction. You could see the faint outline of distant ridges like layers stacked on top of each other. I remember checking my heading, adjusting slightly to keep my line clean along the boundary. That's when something caught my eye off the right side. At first, I thought it was just glare. The sun was sitting at an angle that sometimes throws reflections off the wing, especially if you shift position slightly. But this wasn't on the wing. It was just beyond it. I leaned a little to the right, looking past the strut. There was something there, a shape, maybe 20 feet out from the wingtip, close enough that I could have thrown something at it if the window had been open. It was dull silver, almost matte, not reflecting sunlight the way metal should. More like it absorbed light and just held it. It didn't look like any aircraft I knew. No wings, no visible structure, just a smooth, rounded form, like part of something larger that I couldn't fully see. My first thought was another plane, maybe flying parallel, but there were no markings, no cockpit, no prop wash, no sound. I checked my instruments. Nothing. No transponder hit. No traffic advisory. The radar screen stayed completely clear. I keyed the radio. Traffic in the area, safe position. Silence. I tried again, a little more direct. Aircraft off my right wing, identify yourself. Nothing. I looked back out at it. Still there. Still holding position perfectly. That was the part that got to me first. It wasn't drifting. It wasn't correcting. It just stayed exactly level with my wing, like it was locked in place relative to me. I adjusted my speed slightly, pulling back just a bit. The object matched it instantly. No lag, no overshoot, just perfect alignment. My hands tightened on the yoke. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was some kind of drone. But even drones make noise. You hear the buzz, especially that close. This thing was completely silent. I glanced down at the shadow on the desert below. My plane's outline stretched across the ground. No second shadow. Whatever was out there, it wasn't blocking light the way a solid object should. I leaned closer to the window, trying to get a better look. The surface looked smooth, but not polished. No seams, no panels. Just a continuous shape that didn't quite register correctly in my head, like my brain couldn't settle on its exact form. I realized I'd been holding my breath. I let it out slowly and said, "Okay, okay." I don't know why I said it out loud. There was no one else in the cockpit. I decided to test it. I banked gently to the left, just a slight turn. The object didn't move at first. For maybe a second, just long enough for my brain to notice, it stayed level, like it ignored the change in my flight path. Then it slid into position again, matching the new angle as if nothing had happened. That delay, it didn't feel mechanical. It felt like something adjusting after the fact. My heart started to pick up. I pushed a little harder into the turn this time, sharper angle, enough to shift my heading noticeably. Same thing. For a brief moment, it didn't follow. It just hung there, steady, as if my movement didn't apply to it. Then it corrected. Perfectly. I checked the instruments again, everything normal, altitude steady, engine smooth, no warnings. Except there was something else now. The air felt wrong. Not turbulence, not pressure change. Just a subtle heaviness, like the space around the plane had thickened slightly. It was hard to describe, but I could feel it in my chest, in the way my breathing didn't feel as easy as it should. I keyed the radio again, this time calling the regional frequency. Any traffic monitoring, I have an unidentified object off my right wing, no transponder, no visual markings. Requesting confirmation. Static. Then a voice came through, calm and distant. Say again your position. I gave it. Negative contact, the voice replied. No traffic in your vicinity. I didn't answer right away, because it was still there, right there. I could have reached out and almost touched it. I said, "It's right off my wing. You're not seeing anything?" Negative. I swallowed. Copy that. I released the radio and just sat there for a moment, trying to think clearly. Then I decided to break away. I rolled into a sharper turn, more aggressive this time, enough to push the plane into a noticeable bank. The horizon tilted hard, the desert swinging up into view. For a moment, the object stayed where it was. It didn't follow, it didn't react. It just hovered perfectly level, ignoring my movement completely. That's when the fear really hit, because it meant it wasn't matching me. It had been choosing to. I kept the turn going, pushing through it, letting the plane swing around in a wide arc. When I leveled out again, I looked back to the right. It was gone. No movement away. No fading. Just gone. The sky was empty again, just open air and distant ridges. I checked the instruments. Still nothing. I scanned the horizon in every direction, turning my head so fast it made my neck ache. Nothing. The radio crackled again. "Confirm you no longer have visual?" I hesitated. "Affirmative," I said. "No longer in sight." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. The rest of the flight was quiet, too quiet. Every small noise in the cockpit seemed louder than before. The engine, the airflow, even the slight creak of the seat when I shifted. I kept checking the wing, half expecting it to be back. It never was. When I landed, I sat in the cockpit for a minute before shutting everything down, just staring at the empty space where it had been. I filled out the standard post-flight notes. Didn't mention it. I didn't know how to. Even now, when I fly that route, I catch myself glancing out at the wing more than I should. Not looking for anything specific. Just checking. Making sure there's nothing keeping pace with me that I can't explain. I noticed it the first time because of how quiet everything got. I was on night shift, fueling rotation out on the far side of the base where they park incoming aircraft before moving them into the main hangars. It wasn't glamorous work, just long hours, paperwork, and making sure nothing got contaminated or mislogged. Most nights were the same. You hear a plane before you ever see it. Even at a distance, there's always something. Engine whine, air displacement, the low rumble that carries across the flat desert. That night was different. It was cold, colder than usual for that time of year. Not freezing, but enough that your breath showed faintly under the floodlights. The sky was completely clear. No wind. The kind of still air where sound travels farther than it should. I was finishing up with a standard tanker refuel when I noticed the runway lights shift. Not turn on, they were already on. Just adjust. Like something had triggered a different lighting pattern. Slightly brighter along the center line, a subtle change in intensity. I looked up automatically, expecting to see something on approach. Nothing. No navigation lights, no silhouette, no blinking strobes, just an empty sky. I stood there for a second, waiting for the sound to catch up. Sometimes a plane is far enough out that you see the lights before you hear it, but the sky stayed silent. I went back to my checklist, trying not to overthink it. Could have been a lighting test or some internal adjustment. But a minute later, one of the ground crew trucks rolled past me, heading toward the runway access point. No sirens, no urgency, just moving like it had somewhere to be. That got my attention again. I climbed down from the fuel rig and walked a few steps away, scanning the approach line. Still nothing. Then I saw it. Not coming in from a distance, already there. Low over the runway, maybe 100 feet up, just above the threshold. It didn't appear the way planes usually do. There was no sense of approach, no gradual emergence from the horizon. It was just suddenly present. A shape, long, low, and smooth. Dark against the sky, but not completely black. More like a dull gray that barely reflected the floodlights. No markings I could see, no visible engines, no heat shimmer trailing behind it, and still no sound. It descended slowly, almost too smoothly. No flare, no pitch change. Just a steady drop until the landing gear, if that's what it was, touched the runway. No tire squeal, no reverse thrust, nothing. It just landed. I realized I was holding my breath again. Same way I do when something feels off, but I don't know why. The ground crew truck had already stopped near the edge of the runway, waiting. The aircraft rolled forward, slow and controlled, like it was being guided rather than piloted. I kept expecting the engines to spool up, some kind of noise to break the silence. It never came. Even from where I stood, maybe a few hundred yards away, I should have heard something. Air moving, metal under stress, anything. Instead, the only sound was the faint hum of the floodlights and my own boots shifting on the gravel. The plane came to a stop near one of the isolated taxi points. Within seconds, 2 more vehicles approached from opposite sides, not standard ground crew. These were different, dark-colored, no visible markings, moving with a kind of purpose that made it clear they knew exactly what they were doing. One of the guys from my crew, Jensen, walked up beside me. "You hearing that?" he asked. I shook my head. "Exactly," he said. We stood there for a moment, both watching. The aircraft didn't power down the way normal planes do. No change in lighting, no cooling noise, no gradual settling. It just stayed exactly as it was, silent, still, like it had been placed there instead of flown in. Then they started towing it. A tow vehicle hooked up to the front gear and the plane moved without resistance. No brake release sound, no hydraulic hiss, just a smooth, silent roll as they guided it off the runway toward one of the larger hangars. The whole time, not a single person approached it directly. Everyone kept a few steps back like there was an unspoken boundary. I glanced at Jensen. He looked as confused as I felt, but neither of us said anything. We'd both been around long enough to know when not to ask questions. Once it cleared the runway, the lighting shifted back to normal. The subtle brightness along the center line faded like nothing had changed at all. Probably some new tech, Jensen muttered, but his tone didn't sound convinced. Yeah, I said, though I didn't believe it either. We went back to work, finished the refuel, logged the numbers, did everything by the book. But I kept thinking about the silence. Later, when I checked the incoming logs, the aircraft was listed under a generic designation, just a string of letters and numbers that didn't match any known registry. No model, no origin, no pilot listed. Just received and transferred. That was it. I told myself it was classified, something experimental. That explained the lack of information, but it didn't explain the lack of sound. A few nights later, it happened again. Same pattern. Lights shift. No approach, sudden appearance, silent landing. This time I was closer. Close enough that I should have felt the air move when it passed overhead. But there was nothing. No wind displacement, no pressure change. It moved through the air like the air wasn't there. I watched it from maybe 50 yards away as it touched down. The surface of it looked smooth, almost too smooth. No panel lines, no visible seams, just a continuous surface that didn't reflect light the way normal materials do. When it stopped, I noticed something else. The air around it looked still. Not calm, still. Like even the faint movement from the night breeze didn't reach it. I took a step forward without thinking. One of the personnel near the tow vehicle looked at me immediately. Not aggressive, not threatening, just a quick glance that told me I shouldn't be getting any closer. I stopped. They hooked it up and moved it again, same as before. Straight into the hangar, doors closing almost as soon as it cleared the threshold. No delay, no inspection, just in and gone. That pattern repeated a few more times over the next month, always at night, always silent, always logged under those same generic designations. I stopped trying to figure it out after a while, not because I didn't want to know, but because every time it happened, the same thought came back stronger. Whatever those planes were, they weren't operating under the same rules as everything else on that runway, and the people handling them acted like that was completely normal. We were already 2 nights into the trip when it happened. Caleb and I had driven out past the last marked road, set up camp on a stretch of open desert maybe 20 miles from the nearest town, farther from anything that counted as a light source. It was one of those rare clear nights where the sky didn't just look big. It felt close, like you could reach up and brush your hand through it. We weren't doing anything unusual, just amateur astronomy. He had a mid-range Dobsonian telescope. I had a smaller tracking mount with a DSLR. Nothing fancy, nothing professional. We liked finding quiet places and spending a few nights watching whatever we could catch. That night was calm, no wind. Temperature dropping steadily after sunset, but not uncomfortable. The moon was just past half, bright enough to wash out some of the stars, but perfect for surface detail. Craters, ridges, shadows. You could get a good view if you lined everything up right. Caleb had the telescope trained on the moon while I was adjusting my camera settings nearby. He kept making small corrections, muttering to himself about drift and focus. "Come look at this," he said after a while. I walked over, expecting him to point out a crater or some feature I'd already seen 100 times. "Right there," he said, stepping back so I could take his place. I leaned in, adjusted my eye against the lens, and let it focus. The surface snapped into view, sharp, detailed, the usual gray and shadow patterns. "Okay," I said. "What am I?" Then I saw it. Something was moving across the surface. At first, I thought it was a shadow from the telescope itself, maybe something drifting across the lens, but it was too defined for that. It had shape, not sharp edges, but a clear outline against the moon's brightness. It was dark, not black, just darker than the surface behind it. And it was moving slowly, steadily, left to right. I pulled back slightly, blinked, then leaned in again. Still there. "Do you see that?" Caleb asked. "Yeah," I said quietly. We both watched it for a few seconds without saying anything. It didn't behave like anything I'd seen before. Satellites usually cross the sky quickly, and they don't show up like that through a telescope. Just bright streaks if you're lucky. This thing wasn't a streak, it was solid, continuous, and it was too slow. "Maybe it's closer," I said. "Something between us and the moon." Caleb shook his head. "It's not drifting. Look at the speed." He was right. It wasn't changing pace, just a steady, deliberate movement. I stepped back and looked up at the sky directly. Nothing. The moon hung there, bright and clear, no silhouette crossing it, no flicker, just empty sky. "Check it again," I said. He leaned in, adjusted the scope slightly. "Still there," he said. "Same path." I moved over to my camera setup, thinking maybe I could capture something. It wasn't aligned for lunar shots, but I tried anyway, pointed it roughly toward the moon, adjusted focus as best I could. When I checked the screen, it was useless. Too bright, too blown out. Just a white circle with no detail. "Hold on," Caleb said. I went back to the telescope. The shape was still crossing that maybe a third of the way across the visible surface now. Same speed, same faint outline. "Bird?" I said, even though it didn't make sense. "At that altitude?" he replied. I didn't answer. We watched it for what felt like a long time, but it was probably under a minute. Long enough to track it clearly. Long enough to realize it wasn't changing size or shape. Then, just before it reached the edge of the moon's surface in the scope, it slowed. Not by much, just enough that I noticed. It didn't stop, just eased for a second. Then it continued and passed out of view. Caleb adjusted the scope, trying to follow it. "Got anything?" I asked. He moved the telescope slightly left, then right. "No," he said. "It's gone." I looked up at the sky again, scanning the area around the moon. Nothing. No movement, no flicker, no sign anything had been there at all. We both stood there for a moment, not saying anything. "Maybe we can track it," I said finally. Caleb nodded and pulled out his phone. He had a few satellite tracking apps, real-time data, predicted paths, that kind of thing. He started scrolling through them, checking timestamps. "There should be something," he said. "Anything that crosses that field of view should show up." I waited while he checked. "Nothing," he said after a minute. "No satellites scheduled in that sector, not even debris." "Could it be wrong?" I asked. He shrugged. "Maybe, but all of them?" He flipped through another app, then another. Same result. I walked back to my camera and checked the shots I'd taken, even though I already knew they wouldn't show anything useful. They didn't. Just overexposed moonlight and empty sky. When I came back, Caleb was still looking through the telescope. "You see anything else?" I asked. He shook his head. "No." We spent the next hour watching the same area, adjusting angles, trying to catch anything similar. Nothing happened. And the skies stayed quiet. Eventually, the temperature dropped enough that we decided to call it for the night. Packed up the equipment, zipped up the tent, went through the usual routine, but neither of us talked much. Lying there in the dark, I kept replaying what I'd seen, the movement, the shape, how steady it had been. At one point, I checked my watch. 2:03 a.m. I don't know why I remember that, I just do. Sometime later, I woke up briefly. Not fully, just enough to be aware that something had changed. The air felt different, still but heavier, like before a storm, except the sky had been completely clear. I listened for a moment. Nothing. No wind, no distant sounds, just that same quiet stretched out across the desert. I closed my eyes again and went back to sleep. In the morning, everything looked normal. Clear sky, no clouds, no sign anything unusual had happened. We packed up, drove back, stopped for gas a couple hours later. Before we split off, Caleb said, "You saw it too, right?" "Yeah," I said. He nodded. We didn't say anything else about it. But later that day, I checked the same tracking apps on my own. Cross-referenced times, locations, everything. Still nothing. No record of anything crossing that part of the sky at that time. And the thing that stuck with me the most wasn't just that it moved across the moon. It was how it moved. Not drifting, not gliding. Just steady, like it knew exactly where it was going, right? I was about 3 weeks into the assignment when the scanner did it the first time. It was an interior checkpoint, not one of the perimeter posts. No windows, no outside view, just a long concrete hallway that split two secure sections of the facility. My job was simple: sit at the desk, monitor the badge reader, and log anyone coming through. Most of the traffic was predictable: engineers, maintenance, the occasional officer moving between sections. Everyone had clearance. Everyone showed up on the schedule. That night was quiet. It was just after 1 a.m., the slowest part of the shift. The overhead lights hummed faintly, that constant electrical buzz you stop noticing after a while. The air felt dry, recycled too many times. I was halfway through a cup of stale coffee when I heard the beep. Short, clean. The kind the scanner makes when it reads a badge. I looked up automatically. No one was there. The hallway stretched out empty in both directions. No footsteps, no movement. Just the same dull gray walls and the security door sitting shut in front of me. Then the screen flickered. Access granted. It stayed up for maybe half a second. Then it reset to the idle display like nothing had happened. I stared at it, waiting for someone to come through the door. Sometimes people badge in and hesitate, check something, take a call. But the door didn't open. It stayed locked. I stood up, walked around the desk, and looked down the hallway again. Still empty. "Hello?" I said, just out of habit. No response. I checked the system log. The entry was there, time-stamped exactly when I heard the beep. The ID field was blank. No badge number, no name, just the word "granted." I told myself it was a glitch. Old hardware, maybe a faulty read. These systems weren't exactly cutting edge. I made a note in the logbook and sat back down. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps from the far end, real ones this time. A guy named Ortiz came through, nodded at me, badged in, and went on his way. "Anyone just come through?" I asked. He shook his head. "Just me." "Scanner's acting up," I said. He shrugged. "Happens." It didn't feel like that kind of problem, but I let it go. The second time it happened, I was ready for it. Same time frame. Around 1 a.m., give or take a few minutes. Quiet shift, no scheduled traffic. Beep. I looked up immediately. Empty hallway. The screen flashed. Access granted reset. This time I moved faster, got up, checked both directions, even stepped closer to the door like maybe someone was standing just out of sight. Nothing. No sound. No movement. I checked the log again. Same thing. Timestamp, blank ID, access granted. No door activity. No record of the lock disengaging. It was like the system thought someone had been cleared through, but the door never actually opened. I reported it after that. Talked to a supervisor named Hale. He listened, nodded, wrote something down. "Probably a sensor issue," he said. "We'll have maintenance take a look." "Shouldn't it at least show a badge ID?" I asked. "It should," he said, "which is why we'll check it." That was it. Maintenance never showed up, or if they did, it wasn't during my shift. The third time, I started paying attention to everything. I noted the time. 1:12 a.m. The air felt colder than usual. Not by much, just enough that I noticed it when I shifted in my chair. Beep. I was already looking at the scanner when it happened. No one there. Access granted. Reset. But this time, I noticed something else. The hallway lights flickered. Not a full outage, just a quick dimming, like the power dipped for a split second. I stood up slowly, listening. The hum of the lights seemed quieter for a moment, then returned to normal. I walked down the hallway, checking the corners, the side doors, anything that might explain it. Everything was locked. Everything was quiet. When I got back to the desk, I checked the cameras. We had 2 angles covering that stretch, one facing toward the door, one looking down the opposite direction. I pulled up the footage for the last few minutes. There was the hallway. Empty. Still. Then the timestamp hit 1:12. The screen flickered slightly, just like the lights had. For a single frame, the image blurred, not distorted, just off. Then it snapped back. No one there. I replayed it a few times. Same result. No figure, no shadow, nothing moving through the frame. Just that brief flicker. After that, I stopped assuming it was a glitch. Something was triggering the system. Something the cameras weren't picking up. The next night, I brought it up with Ortiz again. "You ever see the scanner trip on its own?" I asked. He hesitated. "Once," he said. "A couple weeks ago." "What happened?" He shrugged. "Same thing you're saying. Left beep. Grant. Nobody there." "You report it?" "Yeah." "What'd they say?" He gave a small smile. "Same thing they told you." That didn't make me feel better. A few nights later, it happened again. This time I didn't get up right away. I stayed seated watching the door. Beep. Access granted. Reset. And for just a second, barely noticeable, I thought I saw something. Not a person, not a shape. Just a distortion in the air right in front of the door. Like heat rising off pavement, except the hallway was cold. It lasted less than a second, then it was gone. I stood up anyway, walked over, checked the area. Nothing. No change in temperature, no sound. Just that same empty hallway. I didn't write that part in the log. Didn't think it would help. After that, I started dreading that hour. Watching the clock tick toward it, waiting for the beep. Some nights it didn't happen. Other nights, it did. Always the same, always within a few minutes of 1 a.m. One night, I decided to test something. I propped the door open slightly, just enough that if the lock engaged, I'd see it move. I sat back down and waited. 10099, 110, 111. Beep. Access granted. The door didn't move. The latch didn't retract. Nothing happened except the screen flashing that same message. I got up slowly, walked over, and pushed the door. Locked. Whatever was triggering the system wasn't actually unlocking anything. It just made the system think it had. The next morning, my schedule changed. No explanation, just reassigned to a different post on the opposite side of the facility. When I asked Hale about it, he said, operational needs. I didn't argue. My new post had a different scanner, different hallway. I worked there for another 2 weeks, never heard a phantom beep, never saw an empty access grant. But sometimes, late in the shift, I'd catch myself listening, waiting for that sound. And once, just once, I thought I heard it again. Faint, from somewhere deeper in the building. A single clean beep, then nothing. I first noticed it because the line was too clean. I'd been out there about a week, running seismic surveys along a stretch of land just outside the restricted boundary. Nothing unusual about the job. We were mapping minor ground movement, checking for fault shifts, the kind of baseline data they like to keep updated in case anything changes. Most of the readings were what you'd expect. Background noise, occasional low-level tremors, nothing that stood out. The equipment I was using wasn't top tier, but it was sensitive enough to pick up subtle movement. Usually that just meant wind, distant track, or the earth settling in ways you don't think about. That morning was cold and clear. Early light, barely any wind. I'd set up one of the sensors about half a mile from my truck, anchored it, and started recording. The first tremor showed up around 6:20 a.m. It was small, barely above background noise, but it was sharp, like a clean spike instead of the usual messy ripple you get from natural movement. I didn't think much of it. Logged it, checked the calibration, moved on. Then it happened again. Same shape, same intensity, almost identical. I checked the timestamp. Exactly 3 minutes later. That got my attention. Natural tremors don't space themselves like that. Not evenly. Not that precise. I stayed with the sensor, watching the data scroll in real time. 3 minutes later, it happened again. Same spike, same clean edge, same duration. I crouched there, staring at the screen, waiting for the next one. When it came, it matched the others perfectly. Okay, I said out loud, even though there was no one around. I checked the equipment. Made sure the sensor was stable, the ground anchor secure, no loose connections, no interference from my truck or any nearby electronics. Everything looked normal. I pulled up the secondary sensor a few hundred yards away. It showed the same pattern, same timing, same spikes. Whatever was causing it wasn't localized to one point. It was moving through the ground or coming from below. I stayed there for the next half hour, logging each event as it came in. Every 3 minutes, no variation, no drift, just that same steady repeating tremor. By mid-morning, I had a clean sequence recorded, enough to show a pattern, not just a coincidence. I packed up and headed back to the temporary station we'd set up near the road. My supervisor, Danvers, was already there, going through his own data. Got something weird, I said, handing him the tablet. He skimmed through it, nodding slowly. Looks like interference, he said. From what? I asked. He shrugged. Could be anything. Equipment glitch. Environmental noise. It's repeating, I said. Every 3 minutes, exactly. He looked at me, then back at the screen. Still interference, he said. That didn't sit right. Shouldn't we check it out? I asked. If it's consistent like this? We'll flag it, he said, cutting me off. Mark it for review. That was it. No follow-up, no interest in the pattern, just a note in the system. I went back out that afternoon, set up another sensor farther down the line, closer to the boundary. The tremors were still there, same interval, same shape. But something else had changed. They were slightly stronger, not by much, just enough that the spikes were a little more pronounced. I checked the timing again, still every 3 minutes. But now, if I zoomed in on the waveform, I could see something I hadn't noticed before. Each spike wasn't a single event, it was two. A primary pulse, followed by a smaller one about half a second later, like an echo, or a response. I sat there in the heat, staring at the screen, trying to make sense of it. Natural earthquakes don't do that. Not in a clean, repeatable way. And they definitely don't keep perfect time. I recorded another hour of data, then headed back. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The regularity, the precision. It didn't feel random. It felt deliberate. The next morning, I checked the system. My data had been updated, or rather changed. The tremors were still there, but the annotations were different. Each one was labeled as equipment interference. No mention of timing, no mention of pattern, just a generic tag applied across the board. I went to Danvers. "Why'd you mark it like this?" I asked. He didn't look up from his desk. "That's what it is," he said. "It's not," I said. "You saw the data. It's consistent." He finally looked at me. "Doesn't matter," he said. "That's the classification." I stood there for a second, waiting for him to explain. He didn't. "Shouldn't we at least investigate?" I asked. "No," that was the end of the conversation. I went back out anyway. This desk set up 3 sensors this time, spaced farther apart, trying to triangulate the source. The tremors came right on schedule. But now, with multiple sensors, I could see something else. The signal wasn't coming from a single point. It was moving. Each sensor picked up the tremor at a slightly different time, but the interval stayed consistent, like something was passing beneath them, slowly, steadily, in a straight line. I mapped the delay between sensors, did a rough calculation. Whatever it was moving at a constant speed, not fast, not slow, just consistent. I stood there in the late afternoon heat, looking out over the desert, trying to imagine something moving under the ground like that. There were no vehicles, no drilling operations, nothing that would explain it. And even if there had been, it wouldn't have been that precise. As the sun started to set, the tremors continued. Every 3 minutes. Same pattern, same echo. I packed up as the light faded, but I left one sensor running overnight, just to see what would happen. The next morning, I checked the data. The tremors had continued through the night. No gaps, no variation until 2:18 a.m. After that, nothing. The pattern just stopped. No gradual fade, no change in intensity, just a clean break, like whatever was causing it had turned off. I brought the data back to the station. By the time I got there, my access had been restricted. Couldn't open the files I just recorded, couldn't pull up the logs. Danvers was already waiting. "Your assignment's been shortened," he said. "You're heading back today." "Why?" I asked. "Project complete." "That doesn't make sense," I said. "We're not done mapping." "We are," he said. I looked at him, trying to read something in his expression. There was nothing there, just a flat, neutral look. "What about the tremors?" I asked. "Equipment interference," he said. Same answer, same tone. I didn't argue. Packed up my gear, loaded the truck, drove out. As I hit the highway, I checked the tablet one last time. The data from that last night was gone. No record of the tremors stopping, no record of them happening at all. Just a clean data set with no anomalies, like the ground had been perfectly still the entire time. But I knew what I'd seen, every 3 minutes, like a heartbeat or a signal, something repeating over and over just beneath the surface. And then, all at once, it stopped. It was just before closing when they came in. I was on the late shift in one of the smaller cafeterias, the kind tucked away from the main flow of people. Mostly maintenance crews, night techs, and whoever happened to be working odd hours. Nothing unusual about it. Quiet, predictable. That night had been slow. Rain earlier in the evening had cooled everything down, which almost never happens out there. You could smell it faintly in the air every time the doors opened. Wet dust, not quite mud, just enough to remind you the desert isn't always dry. I was wiping down the serving counter when the door opened again. 5 of them walked in. At first, I didn't think much of it. Just another group finishing a shift. but something about them felt off right away. They were all wearing standard work uniforms. Nothing special. Dark coveralls, boots, ID badges clipped where they should be, but they were covered in dust. Not the usual kind. Desert sand gets everywhere, but it's tan, reddish, uneven. This was gray, fine, almost like powder. It clung to them differently, too, like it didn't want to fall off. It coated their shoulders, their sleeves, even their hair, and it didn't look like it had been kicked up from the ground, more like it had settled on them. They moved quietly. No talking between them, no joking around like most crews do when they finally get a break. Just straight to the counter. "What can I get you?" I asked. The one in front, tall guy, maybe mid-30s, looked at the menu board for a second longer than normal, like he was trying to process it. "Coffee," he said finally. His voice sounded dry, not hoarse, just flat. The others ordered similar things. Coffee, a couple trays with basic food, nothing complicated. As I handed the cups over, I noticed their hands, same gray dust, worked into the lines of their skin. Not caked like dirt, just a thin layer, almost uniform. And it didn't look like it had mixed with sweat the way sand usually does. It stayed dry. "You guys working out near the ridge?" I asked, just making conversation. The tall one looked at me for a second. "Something like that," he said. No follow-up, no detail. They moved to one of the tables near the back, sat down without saying much to each other. I went back to cleaning, but I kept glancing over. They weren't eating. The trays just sat there. Steam from the food faded, then stopped completely. The coffee cups stayed full. One of them picked up a fork, turned it in his hand like he wasn't sure what to do with it, then set it back down. Another stared at the wall for a long stretch, not looking at anything in particular. "Everything okay?" I called out. No response at first. Then the tall one said, "Yeah." Same flat tone. They stayed like that for maybe 15 minutes. No conversation. No movement beyond small shifts in posture. At one point, I thought I saw one of them look at the ceiling, like he was listening for something. The others didn't react. The whole room felt quieter than it should have. Even the usual background noise, the refrigeration units, the vent system, seemed muted. I finished closing tasks early, mostly because there was nothing else to do. When I looked back at them again, one of the trays had been moved slightly, but the food was still untouched. "Kitchen's closing soon," I said. The tall one nodded. They all stood up at the same time. Not in sync exactly, but close enough that I noticed. They left the trays where they were, didn't throw anything away, didn't clean up, just walked out. As they passed the counter, I caught a stronger smell, not like dirt, not like anything I could place. Something dry and sharp, almost metallic, but faint. The door closed behind them. I waited a few seconds, expecting to hear them outside. Footsteps, voices, something. Nothing. I stepped out from behind the counter and walked over to their table. The trays were exactly as they'd left them, food untouched. Coffee barely sipped. I picked up one of the cups. Cold. It shouldn't have been. They'd just been holding it. I set it back down and looked at the chairs. There was a light dusting of that same gray powder on the seats where they'd been sitting. Not much, just enough to notice when the light hit it. I brushed a finger across one of the spots. It felt fine, almost too fine, like ash, but heavier. It didn't smear the way ash does. It just shifted, then settled again. I wiped my hand on a towel and finished closing. The next morning, I asked the day shift if they'd seen those guys come through earlier. "What guys?" one of them said. "The group from last night. 5 of them, covered in dust." They looked at each other. "No one came in that late," another said. "They were here," I said, "around closing." "Schedule was empty after 10, the first one replied. "You sure?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I went to check the logs. Everyone who badges into the cafeteria gets recorded. It's automatic. I pulled up the entry times for the night before. Nothing. No record of anyone coming in during that window. I checked the camera footage next. Scrolled to the time they should have arrived. The door stayed closed. No one entered. No one left. The footage just showed an empty room. Me behind the counter, going about my shift like nothing had happened. I watched it twice. Same result. When I went back to the table where they'd been sitting, it was clean. No gray dust. No trace they'd ever been there. Just the usual wiped-down surface, ready for the next shift. I didn't bring it up again after that. Didn't feel like something I should keep pushing. But every now and then, during late shifts when it's quiet and the air feels a little too still, I catch myself looking at the door, waiting to see if it opens again and wondering what that dust actually was. I had been out there since just before sunset, parked along one of those long, empty desert roads where people go to watch the sky. Not right up against anything restricted, just far enough out that the horizon stayed clean and the stars came in sharp once it got dark. I'd done this kind of thing a lot. Tripod, camera, long exposures, just waiting for something interesting to show up. Usually it didn't. You get satellites, maybe a plane if you're unlucky, sometimes nothing at all. That night was unusually still. No wind, no insects, no distant traffic. The kind of quiet where even small movements feel louder than they should. The air felt cool but dry, and the sky was clear in every direction. I had my camera set up facing west, catching the last bit of fading light along the horizon. I took a few test shots, adjusted exposure, then settled into a routine. Snap, wait, check, repeat. It was around 9:40 when I first noticed it. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, maybe the afterglow of the sunset lingering a little longer than usual. But this was different. It was lower, closer to the horizon, and it held its shape, a glow. Not bright, not like a spotlight or anything artificial, just a soft, steady patch of light hovering above the distant ridgeline. I lowered the camera and looked at it directly. Still there. I checked the viewfinder again, zoomed in slightly. The glow stayed consistent. No flicker, no pulsing, just present. Probably a town, I muttered, even though I knew there wasn't anything out there for miles. I'd driven that road enough times to know what was on the horizon. Nothing. I took a shot, longer exposure this time, just to see how it would register. When the image came up, the glow was clearer than before, more defined, like a soft oval of light suspended just above the ridge. It didn't spread out the way normal light sources do. It held its shape. I took another shot, same result. I stood there for a minute, just watching it. It didn't move, didn't drift, didn't change intensity, didn't blink like a distant aircraft or tower beacon, just sat there. After a while, I started to hear something. At first, I thought it was just the usual ringing in my ears you get in really quiet places. But this was different. Lower, faint, a hum. Not loud, not mechanical, exactly. Just a steady, almost constant tone that seemed to sit right at the edge of hearing. I turned slowly, trying to figure out where it was coming from. It didn't seem directional. Wherever I faced, it stayed the same. I looked back at the glow. Still there. Still steady. The hum seemed stronger when I focused on it, like it was connected somehow, even though that didn't make sense. I checked the time, 9:52. I'd been watching it for over 10 minutes. I took a few more photos, adjusting settings, trying to capture more detail. But the glow didn't reveal anything new. No edges, no structure, just that same soft shape. At one point, I turned off the camera completely and just stood there. No distractions, no equipment noise. Just the desert and that distant light. The hum stayed constant. It didn't rise or fall, didn't fluctuate with anything I did. I walked a few steps away from the road just to change my position slightly. The glow didn't shift. If it was something close, it should have changed angle, even a little. But it stayed fixed relative to the horizon. That made it feel farther away, or larger. I stopped thinking about that. Around 10, I noticed headlights in the distance, a pair of vehicles coming down the road from the direction of the base. Not fast, not slow, just steady. I stepped back toward my truck, more out of instinct than anything else. Didn't want to be standing in the road when they passed. As the vehicles got closer, I could see they weren't standard cars. Larger, dark, hard to make out details in the low light, but definitely not civilian. The hum didn't change as they approached. The glow stayed exactly the same. I kept my eyes on it as the vehicles came closer, the sound of their engines finally breaking the silence. When they were about a quarter-mile out, something changed. The glow dimmed. Not suddenly, slowly, like someone was turning down a dial. I blinked, trying to make sure I wasn't imagining it. The shape stayed in place, but the brightness dropped little by little. The vehicles kept coming. The hum faded with the light. By the time the first vehicle passed me, the glow was barely visible. Just a faint suggestion against the horizon. I glanced at the vehicles as they went by. No markings I could see. Just dark silhouettes and a quick flash of someone looking in my direction before they were gone. When I looked back at the horizon, the glow was gone, not moved, not shifted, just gone. The hum was gone too. The desert went back to being completely quiet. I stood there for a while after that, waiting, half expecting it to come back. It didn't. I checked the photos later that night, sitting in the cab of my truck with the interior light on. The glow was there in every frame I'd taken during that 20-minute stretch. Same position, same shape. But in the last few shots taken just before the vehicles arrived, it faded out exactly the way I'd seen it in person. After that, nothing. Just the normal horizon, empty and dark. I went back out to that same spot a couple nights later. Same setup, same direction. Nothing showed up. No glow, no hum, just the usual sky. But now, every time I'm out there and the desert goes completely still, I catch myself looking at that stretch of horizon, waiting to see if something settles back into place. I was in the middle of checking a breaker panel when the lights dipped. Not off, just dipped. Like someone pulled power for a second and then let it come back. It wasn't enough to trip anything. No alarms, no emergency lights kicking on. Just a brief dimming that made the overhead fixtures go from harsh white to a dull gray for maybe half a second. I looked up automatically. The hangar was quiet, same as it had been all night. I'd been assigned to do a routine electrical check on one of the older buildings on the far side of the base. Hangar 7C. According to the paperwork, it was unused storage. No active equipment, no scheduled work, just basic maintenance to keep things from degrading. The place felt empty the second I walked in. Not abandoned exactly. Everything was clean, organized, but there was no sign of regular use. No footprints in the dust near the walls, no recent tool marks, nothing. Just rows of covered crates and a wide open floor. The power panel I was working on sat near the side wall, halfway between the main doors and a smaller access hallway. Standard setup. I'd already checked most of the circuits. Everything was stable, until that flicker. I waited a few seconds, watching the lights. They steadied. No further changes. I checked the panel. All readings normal. Voltage steady. No spikes, no drops recorded. Probably just a fluctuation from the grid. I said to myself, but it didn't feel like that. Grid fluctuations usually have a ripple effect. Small variations, not a single clean dip. And they usually show up on the panel, even if it's minor. This hadn't left any trace. I went back to what I was doing. About 5 minutes later, it happened again. This time, it lasted longer. The lights dimmed gradually, not all at once, like something was drawing power slowly, pulling it away from the system in a controlled way. I stood up, turning in a slow circle. The hangar looked the same. No machinery running, no equipment active, but I could feel something. Not vibration exactly, more like a pressure in the air. Subtle, but noticeable. Like standing near a large generator before it fully spins up. I checked the panel again, still normal. No indication anything was pulling extra load. That didn't make sense. If something was drawing enough power to dim the lights, it should have shown up somewhere. I walked a few steps out onto the hangar floor, away from the panel. The dimming continued for another second, then stopped. The lights returned to full brightness. The pressure in the air eased, and just like that, it was over. I stood there for a moment, listening. The hangar was silent. Too silent. Even empty buildings have ambient noise, air movement, distant hums, something. But this felt contained, like the space was holding its breath. I shook it off and went back to the panel. Finished the check, logged the readings, noted the fluctuation. When I turned in the report later, the supervisor on duty, a guy named Kessler, looked at it briefly. Power dip, he said. Yeah, twice. No source on the panel. He nodded, not really paying attention. Probably upstream, he said. We've had minor fluctuations before. In an unused building, I asked. He shrugged. Power's power, doesn't matter where it goes. That was it. No follow-up. No investigation. I should have left it alone, but the next night, I checked the schedule. Same building, same assignment. I didn't question it. Just grabbed my gear and headed back. This time, I paid attention from the moment I walked in. The hangar felt different. Not colder or warmer, just heavier. Like the air wasn't moving the way it should. I set my tools down near the panel and waited. Didn't start the check right away. Just stood there, listening. Nothing. After a few minutes, I started working. Same routine, same readings. Everything normal. Until it wasn't. The lights dimmed again. This time I was ready for it. I stepped away from the panel immediately, scanning the hangar. The dimming was slower now, more gradual, and the pressure in the air came back, stronger than before. I could feel it in my chest, like the air had thickened slightly. Breathing felt just a bit harder, not enough to panic, but enough to notice. I turned toward the center of the hangar. That's where it felt strongest. There was nothing there, just empty floor. But the air above that spot looked off. Not visibly distorted, not like heat waves, just a subtle sense that something occupied that space, even though I couldn't see it. The lights dimmed further. Not enough to go dark, but enough that shadows deepened along the walls. I took a step forward. The pressure increased slightly. Another step. Same thing. I stopped. There was no sound, no machinery, no hum, nothing that would explain what I was feeling. Just that steady draw on the power. I glanced back at the panel. Still normal. No change in readings. Whatever was happening wasn't registering on the system. The lights held at that dim level for a few seconds. Then slowly they returned to normal. The pressure faded. The air felt light again. I stood there, staring at the empty space in the middle of the hangar. Nothing moved. Nothing changed. It looked exactly the same as it had when I walked in. I finished the check, hands a little unsteady now. Logged the fluctuation again. When I got back to the office, I didn't go straight to Kessler. I pulled up the building records instead. Hangar 7C. Status, unused storage. No scheduled operations. No active systems. No equipment listed that would draw significant power. I scrolled through the maintenance logs. Nothing. No notes about fluctuations. No reports from other electricians, just routine checks like mine. I went to Kessler after that. Something's pulling power in that hangar, I said. He didn't look up. Not according to the system. I was there, I said. Twice now. Lights dimmed like something big powered on. He sighed, finally meeting my eyes. Look, he said. If it's not in the system, it's not your problem. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't have to, he said. That was the end of it. The next day, my assignment changed. Different building, different section of the base, no mention of 7C. I didn't ask. A week later, I drove past that area on another job. The hangar doors were closed, no vehicles outside, no activity, just another quiet building sitting on the edge of the base. If I hadn't been inside, I would have believed it was empty. But now, every time I see lights dim, even just a flicker, I catch myself thinking about that space in the middle of the floor. And whatever was there, drawing power without leaving a trace. I noticed the clock first because it didn't match the radio. I'd been driving for a couple hours already, heading north along that long, empty stretch people call the extraterrestrial highway. It was late afternoon, sun dropping, but still bright enough to wash everything out into that pale desert glare. No traffic, no buildings. Just road and open land in every direction. I was running a little behind schedule, so I kept checking the time. Dashboard said 5:12. The radio station, one of the few that came in out there, did a quick time check at 5:04. I remember frowning at that. Radio's off, I said out loud, even though I knew that didn't make much sense. Stations are usually synced better than that. I picked up my phone, checked it. 5:04. Now that didn't sit right. I looked back at the dash. 5:12. 8 minutes ahead. I tapped the clock display like that would do anything. It didn't. All right, I muttered. Whatever. I figured maybe the truck's internal clock had drifted. It wasn't a new vehicle. Company issued. Nothing special. I kept driving. The road was straight, stretching out in front of me like it always does out there. I passed one of the mile markers, 167, I think. I wasn't paying that close attention at the time, just enough to register it in passing. A few minutes later, I checked the dash again, still 5 or 12. Then, right as I was looking at it, the numbers changed. 5:20. No transition. No ticking forward. Just 5:20. I blinked, thinking maybe I'd misread it. I grabbed my phone again, 5:12. I felt that slight drop in my stomach, the kind you get when something doesn't line up and your brain hasn't caught up yet. I held the phone up next to the dash. 2 different times, 8 minutes apart. Okay, I said, slower this time. I glanced at the road. Still empty. Same stretch of asphalt, same low hills in the distance. No turns, no intersections, nothing that would explain any kind of time jump. I checked the radio again. No signal now. Just static. That wasn't unusual out there. Stations come and go. I focused back on the road, telling myself it was just a glitch. Electrical issue. Nothing more. But I kept checking. Every few seconds, the dash stayed at 5:20. My phone stayed at 5:12. I drove like that for what felt like a couple minutes. Then something else happened. The dash clock flickered. Not the numbers, just the backlight, like it dimmed for a split second. Then the time changed again. 5:12. Back to what my phone said, like nothing had happened. I sat there, hands tight on the wheel, staring at it. I picked up my phone again. 5:12. Same time. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Okay, I said. That's fine. I didn't believe that. I looked up at the road again. That's when I noticed the mile marker. I slowed down without meaning to. I had passed 167 not long before. I hadn't seen 168. I would have remembered that. I always keep track of markers out there. It's a habit, helps break up the drive. I checked the rearview mirror. Nothing behind me, no other cars, no dust trails, just empty road. I pulled over, didn't even think about it. Just eased onto the shoulder and stopped. The engine idled quietly. I sat there for a second, trying to piece it together. 167, then 169. No memory of the stretch in between. No sense of time passing. I checked the trip meter. Distance matched what it should be if I'd driven it. Fuel level was consistent too. Everything normal, except I couldn't remember it. I stepped out of the truck. The air was still. Warm, but not oppressive. The kind of late-day heat that hangs without moving. I walked a few steps down the road, looking back toward where I'd come from. Nothing unusual, no landmarks I didn't recognize, no reason to think I'd missed anything. I turned and looked ahead. Same thing. Just road. I got back in the truck and sat there for a minute, staring at the dash. 5:13 now. Time moving normally again. I started driving. At first, I kept my speed down, paying closer attention to everything. The road, the markers, the time. I passed 170, then 171. No gaps. No missing stretches. Everything felt normal again. But I couldn't shake that feeling, like I'd skipped something, or something had skipped me. About 10 minutes later, I checked the radio again. It came back on, mid-sentence. Time check, 5:22 p.m. I looked at the dash, 5:22. I looked at my phone, 5:22. Everything lined up. I kept driving, but I didn't relax. Every mile marker after that, I made a point to say the number out loud as I passed it, 172, 173. Just to anchor myself. Nothing else happened. I made it to my destination without any more issues. That night, I tried to think back on that missing stretch, what I'd seen, what I'd felt. Nothing came up. It was just blank. Not like I'd forgotten details, like there were no details to remember. A few days later, I drove that same route again. Same time of day, same direction. When I hit mile marker 167, I slowed down, watched the road carefully. 168 came into view exactly where it should have been. I passed it. Nothing happened. The clock stayed steady. No jumps, no flickers, just normal driving. I kept going past 169, then pulled over again. Got out, stood there, looked back at the stretch between them. It looked exactly like every other part of that road. Empty. Uneventful. But standing there, I had the same feeling I'd had before. Like something had happened in that space, something I wasn't meant to keep. I got back in the truck and drove off. Now, every time I check the clock while I'm out there, I do it twice. Once on the dash, once on my phone, just to make sure they agree. And every time I pass those mile markers, I pay attention, because I still can't account for those 8 minutes, or what was on that stretch of road while I wasn't. It started as something I figured was just interference. I live about 30 miles out from the nearest town, small place, couple hundred acres of dry land, cattle, and a few old structures that have been there longer than I have. Nights out there get quiet in a way that's hard to explain unless you've spent time in it. No traffic, no distant city noise, just wind if there is any, and sometimes not even that. I keep an old truck radio on in the barn most nights, not for music, just for company while I'm finishing up work or checking on things. It barely pulls in a signal, mostly static with occasional bits of talk radio drifting through. The first time I heard it, it was just after midnight. I was closing up the gate on the north side, radio sitting on a shelf nearby. Static was coming through like usual, uneven and low. Then it shifted, not abruptly, just changed. The static flattened out, like it lost its variation. Then under it, I heard something else. A hum. Low, steady, almost too quiet to notice at first. I thought it might have been something electrical, generator, maybe a loose line vibrating somewhere, but it didn't match anything I had running. I turned the volume up. That's when I noticed the other part. It wasn't just a hum. There was something layered in it. Not words exactly, more like patterns, rising and falling tones that almost sounded like voices, but stretched out and blurred together. I stood there for a while, listening. Probably just a bad signal, I said out loud, more to fill the silence than anything. I flipped the dial. Same thing. Didn't matter what station I tried to tune to. The hum stayed underneath everything, like it wasn't coming from any one frequency. After a minute or two, it faded. Not cut off, just slowly slipped back into regular static. I didn't think much of it after that. Out there, you get weird radio behavior sometimes. Signals bounce, overlap, pick up things from farther away than they should. But a few months later, it happened again. Same time of night. Just after midnight. I was inside this time, sitting at the kitchen table going over some numbers. The radio was on low in the background. I didn't notice it right away, just that something felt different. The house felt quieter. Not silent, just off. Then I realized the radio had changed again. Same hum, same layered sound beneath it. I stood up slowly, walked over, turned it up. It was clearer this time. Still not words, but closer. Like multiple voices speaking at once, just out of sync enough that nothing made sense. The tones overlapped in a way that made it hard to focus on any one part. I listened for a while, trying to pick something out of it. Couldn't. It didn't repeat in a way that felt like language, but it wasn't random either. There was structure to it. I grabbed my truck keys without really thinking about it. If it was a signal, I figured I might be able to track it. I stepped outside, the air cold and still. No wind, no sound from the animals. Even the usual night noises were gone. I got in the truck, turned on the radio. The hum was still there. I started driving north toward the edge of the property where the land opens up more. The closer I got to the far fence line, the weaker the sound became. Not stronger, weaker. That didn't make sense. If I was moving toward the source, it should have been getting clearer, but it faded. By the time I reached the fence, it was gone, just regular static again. I sat there for a minute, engine idling, staring out into the dark. Nothing out there. No lights, no movement. Just open land stretching out toward the hills. I drove back toward the house. About halfway there, the hum came back. Same strength as before, same layered sound. I stopped the truck, listening. It didn't change. I drove forward again. It faded, backed up. It returned. I tried it a few more times, moving slowly back and forth along that stretch of road. The pattern stayed consistent, stronger near the house, weaker as I moved away. That didn't sit right. If it was coming from somewhere out there, the opposite should have been true. I went back inside, turned the radio off, and sat in the quiet for a while. Eventually, I went to bed. Didn't sleep well. The next morning, everything felt normal again. No hum, no strange signal. I tried to pick it up during the day. Nothing. Just regular static and weak stations. I told myself it was just atmospheric conditions, something messing with the signal. But it kept happening. Not every night. Just once every few months. Always around the same time. Always the same sound. And always the same pattern when I tried to follow it. Stronger near the house. Fading the farther out I went. One night, I left the radio on and didn't move. Just sat there and listened. The longer I paid attention to it, the more it started to feel like it wasn't coming from the radio at all. Like the radio was just picking up something already in the air. At one point, I turned the volume all the way down. The hum stayed. Faint, but there. I turned the radio off completely. Silence. I stood there for a few seconds, then turned it back on. The hum came back with it. That was the only time it lined up perfectly like that. After that, it went back to the usual pattern. Radio only. I tried recording it once, just using my phone. When I played it back the next day, it was just static. No hum, no layered sound, nothing. I still get it every now and then, same timing, same behavior. I don't try to follow it anymore. Doesn't seem like it leads anywhere. But when it happens, I sit there and listen. And sometimes, if I focus hard enough, it almost sounds like the tones line up for a second. Like they're trying to form something, but they never quite get there. I noticed it because the mop caught on it. It wasn't a big thing at first, just a slight drag, like the floor dipped for a second. I thought maybe I'd missed a patch, or there was some dried residue I hadn't scrubbed properly. I pulled the mop back and looked down. There was a mark in the concrete. Not a stain, not a crack, an indentation. Perfectly round. I crouched down and ran my hand over it. It was shallow, maybe half an inch deep at most, but you could feel it clearly. Smooth edges, no chipping, no signs of wear around it. Just pressed in. I sat there for a second, trying to make sense of it. This was Hangar 4B, one of the older ones off the main strip. My job was simple, basic cleaning, checking for debris, making sure nothing was out of place. I'd been assigned to it every Thursday for the past 2 months. I knew that floor. It had scuffs, oil stains, a couple hairline cracks near the far wall. But this wasn't there before. I stood up and looked around the hangar. Same as always. Wide open space, high ceiling, overhead lights, buzzing faintly. A few covered pallets along the edges. Nothing in the center. Nothing that would have left a mark like that. I walked a slow circle around the indentation. No tire tracks, no scrape marks, no signs of anything being dragged or moved. Just that one perfect circle in the middle of an otherwise untouched floor. I checked the size by placing my boot next to it. About 3 feet across. Too small for most equipment bases. Too large for anything like a jack stand or tool. And there was only one of them. If something heavy had been resting there, it would have needed support. Multiple points, not just a single spot. I went over to the clipboard near the entrance, checked the log. Last entry before mine was from a guy named Ellis, 2 days prior. Routine inspection, no issues. Nothing about any floor damage. I pulled out my phone and took a picture, then another from a different angle. The light made it look deeper than it was, but the shape stayed consistent, perfect circle. I stood there longer than I should have, just staring at it. Something about it didn't sit right. It wasn't just the fact that it was new, it was how clean it was. Concrete doesn't dent like that. Not without cracking, not without leaving some kind of rough edge. This looked like it had been pressed down evenly, like the material had softened for a moment and then set again. I shook my head. Probably just missed it last week, I said, even though I knew I hadn't. I finished the rest of the hangar, but I kept coming back to it. Every time I passed that spot, I slowed down, looked again like it might have changed. It didn't. Same depth, same shape. When I turned in my report, I mentioned it. Floor indentation, center of hangar. Recent, no visible cause. The supervisor on shift, guy named Rains, read it, then looked up at me. Indentation? Yeah, circular, about 3 feet across. He frowned slightly, not in concern, more like he was trying to place something. Any equipment in there recently? I asked. Not scheduled, he said. 4B's storage only. That's what I thought. He nodded once, then set the report aside. I'll have someone take a look, he said. That was it. Next week I was back in the same hangar. I checked the center first thing. The indentation was still there. Same as before. No changes. But now there was something else. Around the edge of the circle, faintly visible in the dust, were marks. Not exactly. More like slight disturbances in the surface, evenly spaced. I crouched down again, looking closer. They weren't deep enough to be impressions. Just subtle shifts, like something had pressed lightly against the floor in multiple spots around the circle. I counted them. 6, all spaced evenly. I ran my hand over one of them. Nothing distinct, just a slightly smoother patch compared to the surrounding dust. I stood up slowly, scanning the hangar again. Still empty. Still quiet. I checked the log again. No new entries about equipment. No notes about inspections or activity. Just routine stuff. I walked over to the far wall where some of the covered pallets were stored. The covers were still in place. No signs of anything being moved. When I came back to the center, I noticed something else. The air felt different. Not colder, not warmer. Just still. Like the space above that circle held on to the quiet more than the rest of the hangar. I stood there for a minute, listening. Nothing. No hum, no vibration, nothing I could point to, but the silence felt heavier right there. I backed away slowly, not sure why I was doing it like that. Finished the cleaning as quickly as I could. When I turned in the report that day, I mentioned the new marks. Rains didn't even look up this time. Maintenance is aware, he said. Of what? Floor irregularities, he replied. That's it. The next week, I wasn't assigned to 4B. Different hangar, different section. I didn't ask. A couple days later, I drove past 4B on the way to another job. The doors were closed, no vehicles outside, same as always. But something felt off about it, hard to explain, like the building itself was quieter than the others. I slowed down as I passed, just for a second, then kept going. I haven't been back inside since, but every now and then when I'm working in another hangar and the floor catches my attention, just a scuff, a crack, anything, I think about that circle and how clean it was. Like something had been there long enough to leave a mark, and then gone without leaving anything else behind. I noticed it when the drone started fighting the wind. It wasn't unusual out there. Gusts come in hard around the mountains, especially late afternoon when the heat starts dropping. I'd been flying for about 20 minutes already, just getting wide shots of the desert and the ridgeline in the distance. Nothing special, just footage for a small project I was working on. The sky was clear, but the wind had picked up more than I expected. I could feel it pushing against me, steady and dry, carrying that fine dust smell you only get out there. The drone's feed showed it too, small, constant adjustments to stay level. I checked the altitude, then the GPS lock. Everything was normal. I nudged it a little higher, pointed the camera toward the mountains. The light was good, that late day angle where everything looks sharper than it should. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just glare. A faint spot near the ridgeline, catching the light in a way that didn't match the terrain. I adjusted the camera angle slightly. The spot stayed in place, not drifting, not changing shape, just there. I zoomed in a little. It looked metallic, not reflective like a mirror, but dull like brushed metal, catching just enough light to stand out against the background. It was hovering, no visible support, no movement. I frowned and leaned closer to the controller screen. The wind was strong enough that my drone was constantly correcting its position, small shifts left and right, up and down, but that thing didn't move at all. Not even a little. Probably a rock face, I said to myself. But it didn't look attached to anything. It sat just off the slope, a few feet above it, maybe more. Hard to judge distance from the feed, but it wasn't flush with the ground. I pushed the drone a little closer. The signal stayed strong. The object stayed exactly where it was. I kept watching, expecting it to shift or disappear once the angle changed. It didn't. Even as the drone moved, the object held its position relative to the mountain, like it was fixed in space, not the terrain. I checked the wind again. Stronger now. You could see it in the feed, small bits of dust lifting off the ground, moving across the frame. The drone tilted slightly to compensate. The object didn't react. No sway, no drift, nothing. I hovered there for a minute, just watching it, trying to figure out what I was actually looking at. It wasn't big, maybe the size of a car, maybe smaller. Hard to tell without reference points, but it was definitely separate from the mountain. I reached out and tapped the screen, trying to get the camera to refocus. For a split second, the object flickered. Not moved. Flickered. Like the image cut around it, then snapped back. I blinked, thinking it might have been a signal glitch. The feed stabilized. The object was still there. I moved the drone again, slightly to the left. Same thing. The object stayed in place. No change. I started recording, just to be sure I had it. The red indicator popped up on the screen. I held the drone steady, letting the camera capture everything. A few seconds passed, then the object flickered again, this time longer. It didn't disappear completely, but it thinned out like the image was struggling to hold onto it. Then it snapped back, solid again. I felt that slight tension in my chest, the kind you get when something isn't behaving the way it should. I checked the signal strength. Still good. Battery was fine. Everything on my end was working. I decided to bring the drone a little closer. As I pushed forward, the wind hit harder. The drone tilted more aggressively, fighting to maintain position. The object didn't react. It stayed perfectly still. Not even a slight shift. That didn't make sense. Anything that size should have been affected even a little. I got as close as I felt comfortable, given the wind. The object was clearer now. Smooth surface, no visible seams or markings, just a dull metallic shape, slightly elongated and completely motionless. I hovered there for maybe another 30 seconds. Then the signal cut, not completely, just stuttered. The feed glitched for a second, breaking into blocks. When it came back, the object was gone. I froze, staring at the screen. The mountain was still there, same angle, same position, but the object was gone. I rotated the drone slowly, scanning the area. Nothing. No movement. No trace. I pulled the drone back, brought it down carefully. The wind felt stronger now that I was paying attention to it. Or maybe I just noticed it more. I packed everything up and headed home. Didn't think much about it on the drive. Just figured it was some kind of visual artifact, maybe a glitch in the camera or signal, something explainable. Later that night, I loaded the footage onto my computer. Found the section where I'd seen the object. At first, it looked normal. The drone approaching the mountains, the landscape steady. Then the object appeared, just like I remembered, hovering, still. I watched it a few times, trying to pick up details I might have missed. Then I noticed something. It didn't appear in every frame. I scrubbed back frame by frame. In one frame, it was there. In the next, it was gone. Then back again. Not fading, not moving. Just absent, like it only existed in certain moments of the recording. I leaned back in my chair, replaying it over and over. The timing wasn't consistent either. Sometimes it stayed for 3 or 4 frames in a row, sometimes it vanished for 2, then came back. The mountain behind it stayed perfectly stable. No glitches, no distortion, just the object flickering in and out. I checked the rest of the footage. Nothing else behaved like that, just that one section. I tried to zoom in, enhance it, see if I could get a clearer look. Didn't help. The flickering stayed. I closed the video after a while, left it sitting there on the screen. I went back out a few days later, same spot, same time of day. Flew the drone toward the same ridge. Nothing. No object. No flicker. Just the mountains and the wind. But now, every time I review footage from out there, I don't just watch it, I go frame by frame, just in case something's there for a moment I might have missed. I was about halfway through my second overnight rotation when I saw the first one. It was just after 2 a.m., the slow part of the shift where nothing usually happens and you're mostly just watching a screen, trying to stay alert. I was still new, technically a trainee, so I wasn't running anything solo, just monitoring, logging, and double-checking what the senior techs already knew by heart. The room stayed dim all night, just the glow from the radar displays, and a couple overhead lights turned low. You get used to it after a while. Everything feels quieter in there, like the outside world doesn't really exist. My station covered high-altitude returns, mostly commercial traffic at a distance. Occasional military flights, nothing unusual. The software filtered most of it automatically. That's why the first return caught my attention. It wasn't filtered. A small blip appeared near the top of the display. Right above the base coordinates, almost perfectly centered, altitude reading flickered, then locked. I leaned forward. It didn't make sense. The number was too high, way above anything I'd seen come through that system before. Higher than commercial lanes, higher than anything we tracked routinely. "Hey," I said, glancing over at the guy next to me. Mendez. He'd been doing this for years. "You seeing this?" He didn't look up right away. "Seeing what?" I pointed at the screen. "Top center, that return." He leaned over, squinting at it. The blip held steady, not moving, not drifting with wind or showing any track pattern. Just there. He watched it for maybe 2 appeared. No fade, no movement. Just gone. Mendez straightened up. "Probably noise," he said. "Noise?" I asked. "It had an altitude reading. Doesn't mean anything," he replied. "You'll see weird stuff sometimes. System picks up junk." "That didn't look like junk," he shrugged. "Log it if you want," he said, "but it won't go anywhere." I sat back, still staring at the empty spot where it had been. Nothing came back for the next 20 minutes. Just normal returns, everything moving the way it should. I almost forgot about it. Then it happened again. Same position, same altitude range. The blip appeared suddenly, like it had always been there, and the system just noticed it. I checked the timestamp, 2:31. The return held steady, no movement, no signal variation, just a fixed point directly above the base. I glanced at Mendez again. He didn't look over this time. I let it run. 5 seconds, 6, 7, then it vanished again. Same way as before, no transition, just gone. I logged it. Time, position, altitude, marked it as anomalous. Didn't expect anything to come from it. Around 3 a.m., I got up to grab some coffee. Just another tech, Sanders, was at the far end of the room, reviewing something on his station. "You guys ever get weird returns up top?" I asked, keeping it casual. He didn't look up. Define weird. Stationary. High altitude. Just sitting there, then gone. He paused for a second. Atmospheric, he said. That's what Mendez said. Then that's what it is, Sanders replied. I stood there for a moment, waiting for more. Nothing. I went back to my station. The next hour was quiet. No returns in that area, just routine traffic. I started to relax a little, figured maybe they were right, just noise. Around 4:10, it came back, same spot, same altitude, but this time there were two of them, side by side, perfectly still. I leaned in closer, adjusting the display settings to get a clearer read. Both returns held steady, no fluctuation, no movement. I checked the system diagnostics. Everything normal, no indication of interference or error. Mendez? I said again, louder this time. He glanced over. Now what? I pointed. There, two of them. He looked at the screen. The return stayed. 3 seconds, 4, 5. Then one disappeared. The other stayed for another second. Then it vanished too. Mendez stared at the empty display for a moment. Then he looked at me. You logged that? Yeah. He nodded. Good. That was it. No explanation, no follow-up, just back to his own screen. The rest of the shift went by without anything else. When the morning crew came in, I handed over my logs. The supervisor on duty, Harlan, flipped through them quickly. Anomalous returns, he said. High altitude. Stationary. He nodded. Atmospheric noise, he said, like he was reading it off a script. That's what they told me, I said. But it's always in the same spot. He looked at me for a second. Systems pick up patterns sometimes, he said. Doesn't mean they're real. They had consistent readings. He closed the folder. Log it, move on. That was the end of that. Over the next few weeks, I kept seeing them. Not every night, just occasionally. Always between 2 and 4 a.m. Always directly above the base. Always stationary. Sometimes one, sometimes two. Once, there were 3. They never moved, never tracked, never behaved like anything I'd been trained to recognize. And they never stayed longer than 10 seconds. I started paying closer attention to the timing. There wasn't a clear pattern, but they seemed to show up in clusters. A few nights in a row, then nothing for a week. Every time I logged them, every time the report came back the same. Atmospheric noise. One night, I tried something different. Instead of just watching, I switched to a secondary display mode, one that showed raw data without the usual filtering. The returns appeared there too. Same position, same altitude, but the signal looked different, less stable, like it wasn't fully resolved, almost like the system was trying to lock onto something it didn't quite understand. I stared at it, trying to make sense of the pattern. Then it flickered. For a split second, the returns stretched, not moved, stretched, vertically, like it extended upward for an instant. Then it snapped back, then disappeared. I sat there, not moving, heart beating a little faster than it should have been. I didn't mention that part in the log, didn't see the point. A few days later, I checked the archive data. Wanted to review some of the earlier returns. The timestamps were there, the logs were intact, but the actual radar data, gone. Not corrupted, just missing. Empty segments where the returns should have been. I asked Sanders about it. Archives get cleaned up, he said. That fast? He shrugged. Depends what they are. I didn't push it. I kept working my shifts, kept logging what I saw. Eventually the returns stopped, or at least I stopped seeing them. Maybe they moved me to a different rotation, or maybe they just didn't happen anymore. I'm not sure. But every now and then, when I'm watching the upper range of the display and it's completely empty, I catch myself waiting, expecting something to appear in that exact spot. Just sitting there, not moving, like it's always been there, just outside what the system can hold on to. He walked in holding a wad of paper towels under his nose, already stained through. It was just past 3 a.m., dead quiet in the clinic. Night shifts were usually slow, minor stuff, headaches, dehydration, maybe someone cutting a hand on equipment. Nothing serious. This was different right away. Hey, I said, getting up from behind the desk. What happened? The guy didn't answer at first. He just stood there, blinking like the lights were too bright. Sir? I tried again. He lowered the towels slightly. Blood had run down past his upper lip, dried along one side of his mouth. Yeah, he said, voice a little off. Nosebleed. I nodded, guiding him over to one of the chairs. Sit down. I'll grab something. He moved slower than he should have. Not injured, just delayed, like his body was catching up to his thoughts. I grabbed a fresh pack of gauze, gloves, the usual stuff. When I turned back, he was staring at the far wall, not looking at anything in particular, just fixed there. "What's your name?" I asked, sitting across from him. He blinked like he hadn't heard me. "Name?" I repeated. "Derek," he said after a second. "Derek Hall." "All right, Derek, tilt your head forward for me." He did, but it was uneven, like he overcorrected, then adjusted. I replaced the soaked towels with gauze, applied light pressure. "How long's it been bleeding?" He shrugged slightly. "Not sure." 15 minutes? Longer? "I don't know," he said again. I didn't check. That wasn't unusual. People don't usually time things like that, but the way he said it felt empty. "Any injury? Did you hit your face or anything?" "No." "Headache?" He hesitated. "A little," he said. "Earlier." "Still there?" "Not really." I watched him for a moment. His eyes weren't tracking normally, not unfocused, just slow to settle. "Where are you coming from?" I asked. "Work," he said. "Which building?" He didn't answer right away. "The older hangars?" he said finally. I made a note of that, even though it didn't mean much on its own. There were a few structures out there that got rotated through maintenance or storage. "Doing what?" "Electrical checks," he said. "By yourself?" "Yeah." I nodded, then leaned in slightly to check the bleeding. It had slowed already. Not stopped completely, but less active. "Any dizziness?" I asked. He nodded. "Yeah." "Now or earlier?" "Earlier. A little now." On a scale of 1 to 10, he looked at me like he was trying to remember how that worked. 3, he said. I wrote it down. "Any nausea?" "No." "Vision problems?" He blinked again, slower this time. "Things felt off," he said, "for a bit." "Off how?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. "Just off." I didn't push it. I checked his pulse, slightly elevated, but nothing alarming. Skin felt normal, no fever. "Have you had nosebleeds like this before?" I asked. He shook his head. "No." "Any medical conditions? Blood pressure issues?" "No." I leaned back, looking him over again. There was something about him that didn't line up. Not sick, not injured, just out of sync. "How long were you working tonight?" I asked. "Couple hours," he said. "What time did you start?" "Midnight." "And when did the nosebleeds start?" He paused. "I don't know." "You don't remember?" He shook his head. "No." I glanced at the clock on the wall. 3:18 a.m. "You came straight here?" I asked. "Yeah." "From the hangar?" "Yeah." "How far is that from here?" 10 minutes, he said. "Drive or walk?" "Drive." I nodded again. "Anyone else with you tonight?" "No." The bleeding had mostly stopped now. I removed the gauze carefully, checked for any continued flow, just a slight trace. "All right," I said. "Looks like it's settling." He nodded, but didn't say anything. "Let's keep you here for a few minutes, make sure it doesn't start up again." He leaned back in the chair, eyes drifting again. "Derek," I said. He looked at me. "Do you feel okay to drive?" He hesitated. "Yeah," he said, "I think so." "Think so or no so?" He didn't answer. I watched him for another minute. "Any ringing in your ears?" I asked. He frowned slightly. "Maybe earlier," he said. "Not now." "Anything unusual happen while you were working?" He shook his head. "No." "Nothing at all?" "No." His answers were too quick now, like he was trying to close the conversation. I didn't push further. After about 10 minutes, his color looked normal again. Breathing steady. No new symptoms. "All right," I said. "I don't see anything concerning right now. Could have been a pressure issue, dry air, something like that." He nodded. "Yeah." "I'd take it easy for the rest of the night. If it happens again, come back in." "Okay." I handed him a clean cloth, just in case. He stood up, a little steadier than before. "Thanks," he said. "No problem." He walked out without looking back. I filled out a basic treatment note. Nothing major. Nosebleed, mild disorientation, resolved. When I got to the incident report section, I paused. Technically, I could have filed one. Unexplained symptoms, late night shift, vague details. But there was nothing concrete. No injury, no ongoing issue. I left it blank. A couple hours later, just before shift change, I checked the system out of curiosity. No follow-up entries, no flags, nothing. Later that week, I saw him again, not in the clinic, walking across one of the outer corridors, talking to another tech. He looked completely normal. No sign anything had happened. I considered stopping him, asking a few more questions, but something about the way he was moving, the way he was talking, like everything had reset, made me hold off. I kept walking. Now, every time someone comes in late at night with something that doesn't quite add up, I think about that shift and how quickly everything went back to normal, like it hadn't happened at all. I had been sitting there long enough that the engine ticked itself quiet. It was one of those nights where the desert just stays still. No wind, no distant noise, just that low hum you get from your own truck cooling down and nothing else. I'd pulled up to the checkpoint around 11:40 p.m., handed over my paperwork, and they told me to wait. "Couple minutes," one of the guards said. That usually meant anywhere from 5 minutes to an hour, depending on what they had going on. I shut the engine off, stepped out, leaned against the door, and waited. The sky was clear. Full moon, bright enough to throw shadows across the ground. You could see everything, every rock, every small rise in the sand, all lit in that pale white light. The guards didn't talk much. 2 of them by the gate, another one in the small booth. Every now and then one would glance over at me, then back toward the road behind the fence. I didn't think anything of it. I've done deliveries out there before. You get used to the quiet, the waiting, the feeling like you're not really supposed to be anywhere near where you are. After about 10 minutes, I checked my watch. 11:52. Still nothing. I paced a little, more to stay awake than anything else. The air had cooled down, but the ground still held heat from earlier in the day. That's when I noticed the first thing, the shadows. They shifted. Not a lot. Just enough that it caught my eye. I looked down at the ground near my feet. My shadow had stretched out behind me, sharp and clear under the moonlight. Then it softened, not disappeared slightly like the light source had dimmed for a second. I looked up at the moon. Still there, same brightness. "Probably a cloud," I muttered. But the sky was empty. No clouds, not even a haze. I looked back down. The shadow was sharp again. I stood there for a second, trying to decide if I'd imagined it. Then it happened again. This time, it was more obvious. The ground in front of me darkened, not like a shadow moving across it from the side. It was like something above was blocking the light directly. The brightness dropped evenly, like someone had turned down a dimmer switch for a second. I stepped away from the truck, looking out across the desert. The darkening moved, slow, steady, like something large was passing overhead, but there was no sound, no wind shift, no engine noise, nothing, just that smooth movement of shadow rolling across the ground. I felt it before I fully understood it, that tightness in your chest when something doesn't make sense but your body reacts anyway. I tilted my head back, looking straight up. Stars. That's all I saw. Clear sky, full of stars, no gaps, no shapes, nothing blocking them, but the ground was still dimming. The shadow passed over me completely for maybe 2 seconds. In that moment, the moonlight felt thinner, like it had been filtered. Then it was gone. It was gone. The light snapped back to normal. I stood there, still looking up. Nothing, just the same sky as before. I slowly lowered my head, looking out across the desert again. The ground looked exactly the same as it had minutes ago. No disturbance, no movement, just open space. I turned toward the checkpoint. One of the guards was already looking at me, not in surprise, just watching. "Hey," I called out, walking a few steps closer. "Did something just fly over?" He didn't answer right away, just kept looking at me. "Did you see that?" I asked. Another guard stepped out from near the booth, glanced at the first one, then at me. "See what?" he said. "The shadow," I said. "Something passed over. Big." They both stayed quiet for a second. Then the first one shrugged. "Didn't see anything," he said. "That's not." I stopped, trying to find the words. The light changed. Something blocked it. The second guard shook his head. "Sky's clear," he said. "I know it's clear," I said. "I looked up. That's the weird part." They didn't respond, just stood there watching me. "You guys seriously didn't see that?" I asked. "Nope," the first one said. His tone didn't match the situation. Too flat, too quick, like he'd already decided what the answer was before I asked. I looked back out toward the desert. Nothing, no movement, no sound. I stepped a little farther from the truck, scanning the ground. The shadows looked normal now. Sharp edges, consistent direction, no sign anything had passed over. I looked up again, still just stars. "You sure you're all right?" the second guard asked. "Yeah," I said. "I'm fine. I just saw something." He nodded once, like that was the end of it. "All right," he said. I stood there for another minute, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. Eventually, I walked back to the truck. Leaning against the door again didn't feel the same. I kept glancing up, then back at the ground, trying to catch it happening again. It didn't. After a while, the guard waved me forward. "Go ahead," he said. Gate opened. I got in the truck, started the engine, drove through. As I passed them, I slowed just a little. "You really didn't see anything?" I asked again. The first guard didn't even look at me this time. "Have a good night," he said. That was it. No answer. Just that. I drove the rest of the route without stopping. Didn't turn the radio on. Didn't check the mirrors more than I had to. Just kept my eyes on the road. Every now and then, I'd glance up at the sky through the windshield. Still clear, still full of stars. But every time the truck passed under a slight dip or rise in the road and the shadows shifted even a little, I felt that same tension again, like something might pass over a second time, and I wouldn't see it coming. I only noticed it because I was zooming in too far. The project was routine, reviewing archived satellite imagery for surface changes around the lake bed, mostly erosion patterns, tire tracks, anything that might indicate activity over time. It wasn't classified work on my end, just contracted analysis. They give you a data set, you log anomalies, that's it. I'd been at it for a few hours already, flipping between dates, adjusting contrast, marking small variations that probably didn't matter. The images were high resolution, but the terrain was so uniform it all started to blur together after a while. That's why I started zooming. Not for any specific reason, just to break the monotony. The frame was time-stamped 1422. Clear day, no cloud cover, lake bed, fully exposed. I zoomed in on a section near the eastern edge, somewhere that usually didn't show much. At first, it looked like a faint discoloration, a slightly darker patch against the pale surface. I almost skipped past it. Then I adjusted the contrast. The shape sharpened. Not completely, but enough that it stood out from the surrounding texture. It wasn't random. That was the first thing that hit me. The edges were too straight. I leaned closer to the screen, dragging the zoom in further. The resolution started to break down a little, but the outline stayed consistent. A geometric shape. Not perfectly defined, but structured. Angles that didn't match anything natural I'd seen in that area. I sat there for a minute, just looking at it, trying to match it to something familiar. Runway markings? No. Vehicle tracks? Too clean. Temporary structures? Maybe, but there were no support lines, no signs of setup or breakdown. Just the shape itself sitting flat on the lake bed. I checked the scale. It was big. Hard to say exactly without precise measurements, but easily larger than a standard building footprint. And there were no shadows. That bothered me more than anything else. If it was raised, even slightly, it should have cast something. But the lighting was uniform across it, like it was part of the surface, but not. I pulled up the metadata again. No anomalies flagged, just a standard capture. I opened the next frame. Timestamp, 1428. Same coordinates, same angle. I zoomed in immediately. Nothing. The surface was clean. No discoloration, no shape. Just the same flat, pale lake bed stretching out in every direction. I blinked, thinking maybe I'd loaded the wrong frame. Checked the timestamps again, 6 minutes apart, same pass. I flipped back to the earlier image. The shape was still there. I switched back. Gone. I repeated it a few times just to make sure I wasn't missing something. Same result every time. Present in one, completely absent in the next. No transition, no fading. Just there, then not. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my eyes. Probably a processing artifact, I said out loud. That happens sometimes. Data glitches, compression issues, small errors that show up as shapes or distortions, but those usually look messy, irregular. This wasn't messy. It was structured. I pulled up a third frame, one taken earlier in the sequence. 14. Same area. Nothing. The lake bed looked normal. I went forward again. It's 34. Still nothing. So whatever it was, it only appeared in that one frame. Just 6 minutes, then gone. I zoomed in again on the original image, pushing the resolution as far as it would go. The edges started to pixelate, but the overall shape held. There were angles inside it too. Not just a single outline, subsections like it was divided internally. I couldn't make out details, but it wasn't just a flat shape. There was structure within it. I took a screenshot, saved it locally, just in case. Then I logged it. Anomalous geometric formation observed, present in single frame, absent in adjacent captures. Standard wording, nothing dramatic. I submitted it with the rest of the batch. Didn't expect much to come from it. Later that day, I went back to review it again, just out of curiosity. I opened the archive, navigated to the same timestamp, 422. Zoomed in. Nothing. I frowned, scrolled back, checked the file name, same one, same timestamp, but the shape was gone. The surface was clean, exactly like the later frame. I sat there for a second, not moving. Then I pulled up my local screenshot. The shape was still there, same position, same structure. I dragged the screenshot next to the archive image, comparing them side by side. One had it, one didn't. I checked the metadata again. No indication the file had been updated, no version change, no modification timestamp, just the original data. I refreshed the archive, closed it, reopened it, same result, no shape. I went through the rest of the data set. Other frames were unchanged, no missing data, no alterations I could see. Just that one image now matching the others. I stood up, walked to the break area, grabbed some water, tried to clear my head. When I came back, I opened the file again. Still gone. I hovered over the log entry I'd submitted earlier. It was still there. Anomalous geometric formation observed. I clicked into it. The attached reference image, the one I'd flagged, was now just a standard frame. No shape, no anomaly, just the lake bed. I sat back down slowly. My local copy was still open on the side of the screen. That hadn't changed. I zoomed in again, tracing the edges with my eyes, trying to memorize it, because it felt like if I didn't, it might not stay. I didn't bring it up with anyone, didn't file a follow-up. There wasn't much point. The official record didn't show anything. Just my note, attached to an image that no longer matched what I'd seen. I still have the screenshot. Saved on a drive I keep separate from my work system. Every now and then I open it, look at the shape again, and try to figure out how something that size could appear for 6 minutes, and then leave nothing behind at all. We first heard it when we slowed down. It wasn't anything obvious at first, just a second set of steps where there shouldn't have been any. I remember thinking it was an echo, the way sound carries weird at night out there, but it didn't line up like an echo should. It stayed with us. Jared was a few steps ahead of me on the trail, headlamp off, just using the moonlight. It was bright enough that we didn't need anything artificial, and honestly, the lights just made it harder to see beyond a certain distance. "Hold up," I said. He stopped. The other steps didn't. They continued for maybe 3 or 4 more strides, just past the point where ours had ended. Then, silence. Jared turned halfway around. "You hear that?" he asked. Yeah. We stood there, listening. Nothing came back. Just the low hum of the desert at night, if you can even call it that. It's more like the absence of noise than anything else. "That's probably someone else out here," he said. "There's no one else out here," I replied. We'd been hiking along the edge of the restricted boundary for about an hour. Not right up against the fence, but close enough that you could see it through the dark. Just a faint line running along land, broken up by posts and occasional signs you weren't supposed to ignore. No cars had passed, no other hikers, no lights anywhere. We started walking again. At first, it was just our steps, gravel shifting, the soft crunch of sand under our boots. Then, after maybe 10 seconds, it came back. Another set of steps, slightly off to our right. Parallel, same pace. I stopped again. The other steps didn't. They continued for a few more strides, just like before, then stopped. I felt that shift in my chest, the kind you get when something simple stops making sense. "Okay," Jared said quietly. "That's weird." "Yeah." We turned toward the fence line. It was about 30 yards out, maybe a little more. Hard to judge distances at night. I scanned the ground between us and it. Nothing. Just low brush, uneven patches of sand, and that thin line of fencing cutting across the landscape. "No flashlight," Jared said under his breath. "I'm not using it." We both knew better. Lights draw attention out there, even if you're technically allowed to be where you are. We started walking again, slower this time. The steps matched us, not immediately. There was always that slight delay, like whatever it was needed a moment to adjust. Then it would fall into rhythm with us. Left, right, right. Same spacing, same speed. I tried to focus on the direction. It sounded like it was coming from just beyond the fence, not on our side. That didn't help. "Maybe it's just someone patrolling," Jared said. "Without lights?" He didn't answer. We kept moving. After a while, I noticed something else. There was a faint glow out there. Not constant, not bright, just a subtle shift in the darkness, like something was reflecting light that wasn't there. I blinked, trying to get a clearer look. It showed up for a second, then faded, a soft, pale glow just beyond the fence line. "Do you see that?" I asked. See what? There, right of that post. He squinted. I don't. Wait. It flickered again, not like a light turning on and off, more like something moving just enough to catch the moonlight differently. Yeah, he said. I see it. The steps kept pace with us, steady, measured, not hurried, not cautious, just consistent. We slowed down again, the steps matched, then we stopped completely. This time, I paid closer attention. Our steps ended. The other ones didn't. They continued. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then silence. Jared let out a quiet breath. That's not an echo, he said. No. We stood there longer this time, neither of us moving, waiting to see if anything else would happen. Nothing did. The glow didn't come back right away. The fence line stayed dark and empty. Let's just keep going, Jared said. Yeah. We started walking again. The steps returned, same pattern, same delay, same pace. I tried to change my speed just to see what would happen. I walked faster. The steps stayed behind for a second, then sped up to match. I slowed down. Same thing. It adjusted, like it was watching us or listening. We walked like that for another 10 minutes. The glow came and went, always faint, always just beyond where we could clearly see. At one point, I thought I saw a shape with it, something taller than the brush, thinner than a person. But it was gone before I could be sure. Did you see that? I asked. Yeah, Jared said. What was it? I don't know. We didn't stop that time. We just kept walking. The steps followed. At some point, we reached a section where the fence curved slightly, pulling away from the trail. The distance between us and it increased. The steps faded, not all at once, just gradually, like the sound was stretching thinner until it was gone. We stopped again, listened. Nothing. Nothing. No glow. No movement. Just the quiet. We stood there for a minute, then another. Let's head back, Jared said. Yeah. We turned around, started retracing our path. For the first few minutes, nothing happened, just our own footsteps again. I started to relax a little. Then, just as we got back to the point where we'd first heard it, the second set of steps came back. Right on cue. Same position. Same pace. I didn't look toward the fence this time. Didn't want to see that glow again. We didn't stop. Didn't change our speed. Just kept walking until we reached the car. When we got inside, doors closed, engine running, I finally looked out toward the fence one last time. There was nothing there. No glow, no movement. Just the same empty stretch of desert we'd seen all night. But even with the engine noise and the headlights on, I could still feel it. Like something had been walking alongside us the entire time. And only stopped because we did. I was halfway through my shift when it happened, just standing there, trying to stay awake. It was one of those cold desert nights where everything feels sharper than it should. No clouds, no wind, just that clear sky that makes every star look close enough to reach. I was posted near one of the outer access roads, not right on the fence, but close enough that you could see it if you walked a little ways out. My partner Ellis was sitting in the truck with the radio on low. We'd been rotating every hour just to keep from getting stiff. I stepped away from the vehicle for a minute, mostly to stretch. My boots crunched on the gravel, loud in the quiet. You notice stuff like that out there. Every little sound feels bigger. I remember looking up at the sky just to pass time. It was completely packed with stars. No gaps, no haze. You could see that faint band of the Milky Way stretching across like a smudge. I stood there for a bit, just staring up, not really thinking about anything. Then something felt off. I didn't notice it all at once. It was more like my brain caught it before I did. A section of the sky looked wrong. I squinted, trying to focus on it. At first, I thought maybe my eyes were adjusting, like when you stare too long and things start to blur. But it didn't go away. It spread. Not fast, just enough that I could tell it wasn't in my head. A patch of stars, maybe the size of my outstretched hand, started to dim. Not disappear completely, just fade, like someone had put a layer over them. I straightened up, trying to get a better angle. The rest of the sky stayed the same, bright, sharp, normal. But that one section kept getting darker. I took a step forward without really thinking about it. The dim area moved, slow, steady. That's when it clicked. It wasn't the stars changing. Something was passing in front of them. I waited for sound, any kind of noise, engine, wind displacement, anything. There was nothing, not even a shift in the air. The dark patch kept moving, sliding across the sky like a shadow that didn't belong there. I remember raising my hand, Lining it up with the edge of it, it was bigger than I thought. Way bigger. It stretched past where I could track it without turning my head. "Ellis," I called out, not taking my eyes off it. No answer. He probably had the radio up. "Ellis," I said louder. The truck door opened behind me. "What?" he called. "Look up," I said. He stepped out, boots hitting the gravel, then paused. "What am I?" He stopped mid-sentence. "Do you see that?" I asked. "Yeah," he said, quieter now. We both stood there, looking up. The dark shape, or whatever it was, kept moving. No blinking lights, no outline, just the absence of stars where it passed. It wasn't sharp-edged either. The boundary was soft, like the stars were fading as it covered them instead of being cut off. "How high is that?" Ellis asked. "I don't know," I said. It didn't look like anything I'd seen before. Too smooth to be a cloud, too silent to be anything with an engine. And it wasn't reflecting any light at all. If it had been lower, closer to us, it should have blocked the moonlight too. But the ground around us didn't change. Our shadows stayed the same. That part didn't make sense. The sky above dimmed, but the light on the ground didn't. We watched it pass overhead. The darkest part lingered right above us for a few seconds. In that moment, it felt like the air changed. Not temperature exactly, just heavier. Like something was pressing down, but gently. I caught myself holding my breath. Then it moved on. The stars behind it started to come back, not instantly. They faded back in, one by one, until the sky looked normal again. Ellis let out a breath. "What the hell was that?" he said. I didn't answer. I was still looking up, trying to see if anything else followed it. Nothing did. The sky went back to how it had been before. Clear, bright, still. We stood there for another minute, then two, waiting for something else. Nothing happened. Ellis finally shook his head. "Maybe it was a cloud," he said. "There were no clouds," I said. "Yeah, but..." He trailed off. He didn't finish the thought. We both knew it didn't fit. He looked toward the truck, then back at me. "You want to log that?" he asked. I hesitated. Part of me said yes. That's what you're supposed to do. Another part of me didn't see the point. "What would we even write?" I said. He shrugged. "The unidentified aerial? Something." I looked back up at the sky again. It looked completely normal now. Like nothing had ever been there. "Let's just finish the shift," I said. He nodded. We got back into the truck. Neither of us said much after that. Every so often, I'd glance up through the windshield. Half expecting to see it again, it never came back. But for the rest of the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something that big, something that silent had just passed directly over us, and we had no idea what it was. I was about 40 minutes into the route when I saw it, and at first I thought it was just something on the windshield. The sun had just started coming up behind me, low and orange, and it was hitting the glass at that angle where every little smudge lights up. I wiped a spot with my sleeve while keeping one hand on the yoke, expecting it to disappear. It didn't. It stayed in the same place, just off the nose of the plane, a little above the horizon. I leaned forward, squinting through the glare. It wasn't on the glass. It was out there. Long. That's the first word that came to mind. Not wide, not bulky, just long. Like a thin column or a rod standing straight up against the sky. I checked my heading, glanced at the GPS, then back up again. Still there. I banked slightly to the right, just a few degrees, to see if the angle would change. It didn't move. That's when I knew it wasn't something far off in the distance, lined up perfectly with my path. If it had been, the slight turn would have shifted it relative to the background, but it stayed fixed, vertical, completely still. "Okay," I muttered. I reached over and adjusted the sun visor, cutting down some of the glare. That helped. The shape became clearer. It looked metallic, but not reflective like a normal aircraft. More like it absorbed the light in a dull way, with just a faint sheen along one edge where the sun hit it. No wings, no visible markings, no blinking lights. Just that long, straight form standing upright in the sky. I checked my altitude. 8,000 feet. The object looked higher than me, but not by much. Hard to tell exactly without reference points. I tapped the radio. "Albuquerque Center. This is Sierra Foxtrot 923. You showing any traffic roughly 10 miles east of my position?" There was a pause. "Negative, 923. You're clear in that sector." I looked back at it. Still there. "Copy," I said. "Just confirming." I didn't want to sound like I was seeing things. I adjusted my heading again, this time more noticeably. 10 degrees right. The object stayed exactly where it was relative to the horizon. No drift, no rotation, nothing. It didn't make sense. Even something stationary in the air should have some movement relative to me as I changed course. This didn't. It was like it was locked in place. I checked my instruments again, more out of habit than anything. Everything normal. No alerts. No warnings. I glanced at the engine gauges. Steady. I looked back up. Still there. The sun climbed a little higher, lighting the sky more evenly. The object became easier to see now that the glare wasn't as harsh. It was longer than I thought. At least 3 times the height I'd initially estimated, and perfectly straight. No tapering, no bulges. Just a clean, vertical line. I felt that slow build of unease in my chest. Not panic, just that creeping feeling that something didn't belong. Albuquerque Center, I said again, trying to keep my voice even. I've got a visual on an object at my 12 o'clock. Appears stationary. You sure there's nothing up here? Another pause. Negative 923. No reported traffic in your vicinity. I swallowed. Copy. I thought about climbing, getting closer, but something about it made me hesitate. Not in a dramatic way, just a quiet, internal check that said maybe don't do that. Instead, I held my altitude and continued forward, watching, waiting for it to do something. Anything. For a few seconds, nothing changed. It just hung there. Then, slowly, it tilted. Not a lot. Just a slight angle off vertical, but the movement was smooth. Too smooth. No wobble. No adjustment. Just a controlled shift. I leaned forward again, gripping the yoke a little tighter. Do you see that? I said out loud, even though I was alone. The tilt increased, from perfectly vertical to maybe a 30-degree angle. Still no sound, still no exhaust. Then it stopped, held that angle for a second, and then it moved. Not like a plane accelerating, not like a helicopter lifting. It just went upward. Fast. There was no buildup, no gradual increase in speed. It was like it skipped the part where motion starts. One moment it was there, angled in the sky. The next, it was already higher, moving away at a speed that didn't match anything I'd seen before. I tracked it with my eyes as long as I could. It didn't leave a trail, no contrail, no distortion, just that same dull metallic shape getting smaller. Then it was gone. Not faded, not obscured, just out of sight. I sat there for a second, staring at the empty sky. My hands were still on the controls, but I wasn't really aware of them. Albuquerque Center, I said finally. Go ahead, 923. I hesitated. There wasn't a good way to say it. I had a visual on an object, I said. It just departed the area. No transponder, no exhaust. Are you sure you've got nothing? Affirmative, the controller replied. We're not showing any contacts near your position. I looked at the sky again. Clear. Empty. Copy, I said. I didn't push it further. What was I going to say? That something had been hovering vertically in the sky and then shot upward without any kind of propulsion? I finished the route, kept checking the sky every few minutes. Nothing else showed up. When I landed, I sat in the cockpit for a while before shutting everything down. Just thinking it through. Trying to find a way to explain it that made sense. I checked my logs, my instruments. Everything looked normal. No anomalies. No recorded events. Later, I pulled the flight data, went through the timestamps around when I'd seen it. Nothing. No indication of anything unusual. Just a steady flight path. Same altitude, same speed. I still fly that route sometimes. Same time of day, same conditions. Every now and then, I catch myself looking out at that section of sky, expecting to see it again, but it's always empty. Like it was never there in the first place. I was down in the utility corridor when I first heard it, and at that point I thought it was just another loose pipe. Overnight shifts were usually quiet. Most of the base powered down to a low hum, and the only people still moving around were maintenance or security. I'd been called out to one of the older hangars, Hangar C12, if I remember right, because of a pressure drop in the water line feeding one of the interior units. Nothing unusual. I'd done that same kind of repair dozens of times. The corridor ran along the backside of the hangar, concrete walls, low ceiling, pipes running overhead, and along the floor. Everything painted the same dull gray, with stenciled labels that had faded over time. It was cold down there. Not freezing, just that steady chill you get underground. I had my flashlight clipped to my shoulder, hands-free while I worked. The leak itself wasn't anything major. Just a worn gasket at a joint, slow drip, easy fix. I'd already shut off the section and was halfway through replacing the fitting when I heard it, a scraping sound. Faint. Metal on something hard. I stopped, holding the wrench in place. Listened. Nothing. Just the quiet hum of the pipes. I went back to work. A few seconds later, it came again, longer this time. A slow drag, like something being pulled across concrete. I straightened up, turning my head slightly, trying to figure out where it was coming from. The sound didn't echo the way you'd expect in a space like that. It wasn't bouncing around, it felt directional. Below, I crouched down, putting a hand against the floor. Concrete. Solid. The sound came again. Slow. Deliberate. Like whatever was making it wasn't in a hurry. I tapped the floor lightly with my knuckles. Nothing changed. I stood up, scanning the corridor. No one else was there. No movement. Just rows of pipes in that same dull gray stretching in both directions. Probably just expansion, I said to myself. Temperature changes can make pipes shift, scrape against supports. It wasn't unusual, except this didn't sound like that. It had a rhythm. Not regular, but intentional. I finished tightening the fitting, wiped my hands on a rag, and stayed still for a minute. The sound came back. This time it was clearer. Closer. A drawn-out scrape, followed by a pause, then another. Had like something being dragged, then set down, then dragged again. I felt that small shift in my chest. Not fear exactly, just that feeling when something doesn't line up. I walked a few steps down the corridor, following the direction it seemed to be coming from. The light from my shoulder moved with me, casting long shadows along the walls. The sound adjusted, not louder, not softer. Just there. I stopped again. It stopped too. I waited, and I took another step. It started again. Had same pattern. Scrape, pause, scrape. I crouched down again, pressing my palm flat against the floor. This time I felt it. A faint vibration. Not strong enough to rattle anything, just enough to register. Like something heavy moving somewhere below. I pulled my hand back. There wasn't supposed to be anything below. That corridor was the lowest level. At least, that's what the plan said. I stood up, suddenly aware of how quiet everything else was. No airflow noise, no distant footsteps. Had just that scraping. I turned back toward my tools, half thinking I should just finish up and get out. Then the sound changed. It got closer, not by distance, but by clarity. The scrape became sharper, more defined, like whatever it was had moved directly under where I was standing. I froze. The vibration came through the floor again, slightly stronger this time. Slow. Heavy. Then it stopped. Completely. Just gone. I stayed there, not moving, waiting for it to start again. It didn't. After a minute, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Okay, I muttered. I packed up my tools, quicker than usual, not rushing, just not taking my time. As I was about to leave, I glanced down the corridor one more time. Something caught my eye. A section of the floor, maybe 10 feet ahead, looked slightly different. Not a big difference, just a faint line running across it. I walked over, crouched down, ran my fingers along it. It was a seam, perfectly straight, like a joint between two slabs of concrete, but I didn't remember seeing it before, and it didn't show up on any of the maintenance diagrams I'd worked from. I tapped it with the end of my wrench. The sound was dull, solid, same as the rest of the floor. I stood up, stepping back. The corridor looked normal again, just pipes and concrete. I headed out, climbed the stairs back to ground level. The hangar itself was mostly dark, just a few overhead lights on. Empty. Quiet. I signed off the repair, logged the pressure issue as resolved. Then I went to the office to check the blueprints, just to be sure. I pulled up the layout for C12, scrolled through the levels. Ground floor, utility corridor, that was it. No sublevel, no additional structures beneath. I zoomed in on the section where I'd been working. Nothing indicated a seam or any kind of access point, just continuous concrete. I sat there for a minute, staring at the screen. Then I went back. I told myself I just wanted to double-check the repair. That was it. When I got back down into the corridor, everything was the same. Same lighting, same temperature, same silence. I walked to the spot where I'd seen the seam. It was still there. Faint, but visible. I crouched down again, pressing my ear close to the floor. Nothing. No vibration, no sound. Just quiet. I stayed like that for a few seconds. Then, just as I was about to stand up, I heard it again. Much farther away this time. A scrape, then another. Moving, not under me anymore. Off in the distance, slowly fading. I didn't follow it. I stood up, turned around, and left the corridor. When I came back the next night, the seam was gone. The floor was one continuous slab again. No line, no sign anything had ever been there. I checked the blueprints again, same as before. No changes. I still get called out to that hangar sometimes. Same corridor, same pipes. Every now and then, when it's quiet enough, I catch myself stopping, just listening, waiting to hear that sound again. But it hasn't come back, not yet. We had been out there for maybe an hour already when the lights showed up, and by then we'd settled into that quiet rhythm where nobody talks much anymore. It was me, my brother Eli, and two of his friends, Marcus and Tori. We'd parked off one of the dirt pullouts along the highway, a spot people used for watching the sky. Nothing official, just a wide patch of gravel far enough from the road that passing headlights didn't ruin your night vision. It was cold. Not freezing, but the kind of dry cold that creeps in once the sun's been gone for a while. We had jackets on, hands shoved in pockets, leaning against the cars and looking up. The sky was clear, completely open, stars everywhere, no haze, no clouds. You could see satellites moving if you stared long enough. Those slow, steady points of light crossing the sky in straight lines. We'd already pointed out a couple of those. "That one's got to be a satellite," Marcus said at one point, following a faint dot moving west. "Yeah," Eli said, too steady for anything else. We watched it drift until it faded into the distance. After that, things got quiet again. Tori had a small pair of binoculars and she was scanning around randomly, not really looking for anything specific. I remember shifting my weight, glancing down at my phone for the time, 11:18. When I looked back up, I noticed one light that hadn't been there before. At least, I didn't think it had. It was brighter than the surrounding stars, but not blinking like an aircraft. Just a steady white point sitting higher than most of what we'd been watching. "Hey," I said, pointing. "That one new?" Eli followed my finger. "Which?" "Up there, slightly left of that cluster." He squinted. "Maybe. Hard to tell." Tori lifted the binoculars. "I see it," she said. "It's not moving." Marcus looked up too. "Could just be a star we didn't notice," he said. "Yeah, but it's brighter," I said. We stood there, watching it. It didn't move, didn't flicker, just stayed fixed. After maybe 10 seconds, another light appeared, not by drifting into view. It just was there. A little lower and to the right of the first one. Same brightness, same steady white. Tori lowered the binoculars slightly. "Okay, that one wasn't there," she said. "You sure?" Marcus asked. "Yeah, I was looking right at that area." We all focused on the two lights now. They didn't move, didn't blink, didn't change brightness, just hung there. Then the third one appeared. Higher up, completing a triangle. Perfect. Not roughly triangular, not slightly off. Perfect. Each point evenly spaced, forming a clean shape that didn't distort no matter how long you stared at it. "All right," Eli said quietly. "That's weird." No one laughed. No one made a joke. We just stood there looking up. "Drones?" Marcus said. "At that height?" I asked. "They're not moving," Tori added. "Drones drift." He didn't answer. The three lights stayed exactly where they were. No shifting, no wobble, nothing. I tried to line them up with something in the background, just to see if they were actually fixed, or if it was some kind of illusion. They stayed locked in place relative to the stars around them, which didn't make sense. If they were closer to us, they should have shifted slightly as we moved our heads, but they didn't. "How far up do you think that is?" Eli asked. "No idea," I said. It felt high, higher than any aircraft I'd seen from the ground. We watched them for a while, 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes. Nothing changed. The triangle stayed perfectly intact. I noticed something else then. The space inside the triangle looked slightly different. Not darker exactly, just off. Like the stars inside that shape weren't as sharp. "Do you see that?" I asked. "What?" Tori said. "Inside it, the stars look dimmer." She raised the binoculars again. "Hold on." She adjusted them, focusing. "Yeah," she said after a second. "It's subtle, but yeah." Marcus shook his head. "I don't see it." "It's there," Eli said. "It's like a haze or something." We kept watching. The longer we looked, the more it felt like the triangle wasn't just three separate lights, like they were connected somehow, even though nothing visible linked them. The formation didn't drift, didn't rotate, didn't change shape, it just stayed there, perfectly still. I checked my phone again. 11:23. We'd been looking at it for about 5 minutes. "Why isn't it moving?" Marcus said. No one answered. There wasn't a good explanation. Then, all at once, the lights dimmed. Not one after the other. All three at the same time, slowly, like someone turning down a dial. They didn't blink out. They faded, steadily, evenly, until they were barely visible, and then they were gone. The stars behind them were visible again. Sharp. Normal. Like nothing had been there. We all kept staring at the same spot for a few seconds, waiting for them to come back. They didn't. Did that just... Marcus started. Yeah, Eli said. Tori lowered the binoculars. That wasn't normal, she said. No, I said. We stood there longer than we probably needed to, watching the sky, trying to see if anything else would show up. Nothing did. Eventually, a car passed on the highway, headlights sweeping across the ground, breaking whatever focus we had. The moment felt over. We packed up not long after that, didn't really talk about it much on the drive back, just occasional comments, half-formed thoughts that didn't lead anywhere. When I got home, I went back outside for a minute, looked up at the sky again, same stars, same patterns, everything where it should be. But I kept looking at that spot, the exact place where the triangle had been, expecting for some reason that it might still be there. Just faint enough that I'd missed it the first time. It started as something people joked about, the way stuff does when nobody wants to say it outright. I'd only been on base a few months when I first heard it. I was still new enough that everything felt temporary, like I was just filling in until someone else took my place. We were in the break room, me, a guy named Holden, and a couple others I didn't know well yet. Someone mentioned runway 3. Watch for it, Holden said, not really looking at anyone. Every few months, they clear it out for nothing. What do you mean nothing? I asked. He shrugged. You'll see. Nobody laughed. That was the part that stuck with me. Usually when someone says something like that, it turns into a joke. Someone rolls their eyes, calls it a ghost story, whatever. That didn't happen. The conversation just moved on. I forgot about it for a while, until the first time it happened. I was on a late shift, posted near one of the service roads that ran parallel to the airfield. Not close enough to interfere with operations, but close enough to see the runways clearly if anything was happening. It was one of those nights where the air felt thick. Not humid, just dense. There was a low haze sitting over the ground, barely visible unless you looked at the lights through it. Around 2 a.m., the radio crackled. "Stand by for temporary runway clearance," a voice said. No call sign, no details, just that. I glanced toward the main strip, runway 3. The lights came on, all at once. Not the usual sequence where they step up gradually, just full brightness, stretching out into the dark. I straightened up, watching. A couple of security vehicles rolled into position along the edges. Black SUVs, no markings. They spaced themselves out evenly, headlights off, just parked there facing inward. "Who's coming in?" I asked over the radio. No answer. I tried again. "Control, do we have incoming traffic on 3? Static. Then, negative. Maintain position. That was it. No explanation. I looked back at the runway. Everything was set like a normal arrival. Lights on, vehicles in place, but the sky was empty. I waited. 5 minutes. 10-0. No sound of engines, no distant lights approaching, just the haze and the glow of the runway cutting through it. After about 15 minutes, the lights shut off. At once. The vehicles pulled away one by one, disappearing back into the dark. And that was it. No arrival, no departure, nothing. The next day, I checked the logs. There was no record of any scheduled landing. No notes, no mention of runway activity at that time. I asked Holden about it. He just nodded. "Yeah," he said. "That's what I meant." "What is it?" I asked. He shook his head. "Don't know. Doesn't show up anywhere." I didn't push it. It felt like one of those things you weren't supposed to dig into. A couple months went by, I almost forgot about it again. Then it happened a second time. Same pattern, same call over the radio, same sudden activation of the runway lights, same vehicles lining up. This time I was farther out, closer to the perimeter road, where the ground drops off slightly before leveling out again. You could see the runway, but through more of the haze. It was thicker that night, low to the ground, drifting just enough to distort the lights. I stepped out of the vehicle, leaning against the door, watching. Something felt different this time, not the setup, just the air. It was quiet, too quiet. Even the usual background noise seemed dampened. I checked my watch, 2:11. The lights had been on for a few minutes already, still no sign of anything approaching. Then I noticed it. At first, I thought it was just the haze shifting. A darker patch within the fog, directly above the far end of the runway. I squinted, trying to focus on it. It didn't move like fog should. It held its shape, barely visible, just enough contrast to stand out if you looked directly at it. I took a step forward. The shape became clearer, not defined, not sharp, just a darker presence against the lighter haze. It was descending, slowly, no sound, no lights, just that dark mass lowering itself toward the runway. I felt my grip tighten on the door. "Do you see that?" I said into the radio. No response. The shape continued down, still no noise, no air displacement. The haze around it didn't swirl or shift the way it should have if something large was moving through it. It just passed through. I couldn't make out details. No wings, no edges, just a general outline. Big, bigger than anything I'd seen land there before. It reached the level of the runway. For a second, it seemed to hover. Then, it was gone. Not gone like it flew off. Gone like it blended into the haze and stopped being visible. The runway lights stayed on. The vehicles didn't move. Everything held, like they were waiting. I stood there, staring at the spot where it had disappeared, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. After a few minutes, the lights shut off again. The vehicles pulled away, same as before. I got back into the truck, hands still on the wheel, not starting the engine right away. I looked at the runway one more time. It was empty, completely, like it had been all night. The next morning, I checked the logs again. Same result. Nothing recorded, no scheduled arrivals, no unscheduled ones either. Just a gap where that time should have been. I didn't ask anyone about it this time, didn't bring it up. But every few months when I heard that call come over the radio, stand by for temporary runway clearance, I'd find a spot where I could see runway 3, and I'd watch. Most of the time it was like the first time. Lights, vehicles, nothing else. But every now and then, when the haze was just right, I'd see that darker shape again, coming down slow, silent, like it had all the time in the world. I woke up because the cab was shaking, not violently, just enough that I thought the engine was still running. It took me a second to remember where I was. I'd pulled off onto one of those wide dirt shoulders a few miles out from the facility. They'd told me to be there before sunrise, so instead of trying to time it perfectly, I just parked early and slept in the cab. The truck was off, keys still in the dash. Everything quiet. Except it wasn't. The vibration came through the frame of the truck, up through the seat, and into my back. Low and steady, like something big running far away underground. I sat up slowly, looking around. The sky outside the windshield was still dark, but just barely. That gray-blue you get right before dawn starts pushing through. The vibration didn't change. Not stronger, not weaker, just constant. I leaned forward, checking the dash. All the gauges were dead. Engine off, battery normal. I put a hand on the steering wheel. I could feel it there too. A faint tremor, like a distant engine idling. "What the hell?" I muttered. I pushed the door open and stepped out. The air hit me cold. Desert cold, dry and quiet. The ground under my boots felt the same as the truck, subtle movement, just enough to notice if you paid attention. I stood there for a second, trying to figure out where it was coming from. No vehicles on the road, no lights in the distance, nothing moving, just that low vibration, steady and constant. Then I noticed the sound. It wasn't loud, more like a hum sitting underneath everything else. Not mechanical exactly, just a tone that matched the feeling in the ground. I turned slowly, scanning the horizon. The mountains were off to the east, dark shapes against the lighter sky. That's where I saw it. At first I thought it was just the sun coming up early. A faint glow sitting above the ridge, but it wasn't the right color, too pale. More white than orange. And it wasn't spreading the way sunlight should. It stayed contained, circular. I took a few steps away from the truck, getting a clearer view. The glow hovered just above the mountain line. Perfectly still, no flicker, no movement, just hanging there. The vibration in the ground continued, same steady pulse. I stood there, staring at it, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. It didn't look like a light source, more like something reflecting light. Except there was nothing behind it to reflect from. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was still half asleep. When I looked again, it was still there. Same size, same position. "How far is that?" I said out loud. It looked distant, but the scale felt off. like it was either much bigger than it appeared or closer than it should have been. The edges of it were soft, not sharply defined, just a smooth, circular glow that blended slightly into the sky around it. I pulled my jacket tighter, stepping forward again. The ground vibrated under each step. I could feel it through the soles of my boots now, more clearly than before. The hum seemed a little louder too, or maybe I was just focusing on it more. I looked back at the truck for a second, making sure I wasn't imagining that too. It sat there still, faintly shaking. When I turned back, the glow had changed. Not much, just slightly dimmer. I frowned, watching it. It didn't move, didn't rise or fall, just lost intensity, slowly, like something was turning it down. I reached into my pocket, pulling out my phone. My hands felt stiff, slower than usual. I unlocked it, opened the camera. By the time I looked back up through the screen, the glow was fading faster. "What? Hold on," I said, stepping forward again. The camera didn't pick it up well. It looked like a faint smudge on the screen, barely visible. I lowered the phone, trying to look at it directly again. It was almost gone, just a thin outline of light left. Then that faded too, and the sky went back to normal, just the early morning light starting to build behind the mountains. The vibration stopped. Not gradually, just cut out. The ground went still, the hum disappeared, everything went quiet again. I stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where the glow had been, waiting for it to come back. Nothing did. The sun started to rise properly then, casting light across the desert. The mountains took on that usual brown-orange color. Everything looked normal. I looked down at my phone. The video was still recording. I played it back. All I saw was darkness and a faint hint of light near the horizon. No clear circle, no defined shape, just grainy footage that didn't match what I'd seen. I got back into the truck, hands still a little shaky. Started the engine. The vibration from before was gone. Everything felt solid again. I drove the rest of the way to the facility valley without stopping. Didn't see anything else. When I got there, I asked one of the guys unloading the materials if they'd felt anything that morning. "Like what?" he said. "Ground shaking," I said. "Around dawn." He shook his head. "Nothing," he said. I didn't push it. I just signed the paperwork and left. Every time I drive that route now, I try to time it so I'm not parked out there before sunrise. But sometimes schedules don't line up. And if I do end up stopping along that stretch, I don't sleep as deeply anymore. I keep waking up, listening for that low hum, waiting to feel the truck start shaking again. I first noticed it because the shadow moved before I did. I was out there just after sunset, working on a section of perimeter floodlights that had been acting up for a couple weeks. Nothing urgent, just flickering and inconsistent brightness. They'd finally decided to send someone out to replace the wiring. It was me and a guy named Rivas, but he stayed back near the truck most of the time, handling the radio and logging the repair. I was the one actually out by the fence. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, leaving that dull orange glow along the edge of the desert. The floodlights were already on, casting long, sharp shadows across the sand. I had my toolkit open at the base of one of the poles, unscrewing the panel to get at the wiring when I saw it. A shadow sliding across the ground. At first, I thought it was mine, but I hadn't moved. I paused, wrench in hand, and looked down. My shadow was still where it should be, and stretched out behind me. The other one was off to the side, long, thin, moving slowly across the sand. I turned, scanning the area. Nothing. No vehicles, no people, no equipment moving. Just the fence line and the lights. The shadow kept moving. Not fast. Just a slow, steady shift like something passing between the lights and the ground. Except there was nothing there. "Rivas?" I called out. "Yeah?" His voice came back over the radio. "You seeing anything on the cameras out here?" "Negative," he said. "Why?" "Just checking." I didn't know how to explain it without sounding like I'd lost it. I went back to the panel, trying to focus on the wiring. Loose connection near the terminal. Easy fix. But I kept glancing down. The shadow was still there. Now it was stretching, getting longer, then shorter, like whatever was casting it was changing shape or distance. I stood up straight, turning fully toward it. The ground was flat, open, nothing to block the light, but the shadow kept shifting. It moved in a way that didn't match any object I could think of. Not a person, not a vehicle. Too smooth, too controlled. I walked a few steps toward it. It didn't react, didn't speed up or slow down, just kept doing the same thing, stretching, contracting, sliding across the sand. I stopped about 10 feet away. The shadow passed right in front of me. For a second, it crossed over my boots, darkening them slightly. I looked down, watching it. There was still nothing above it. I tilted my head back, looking up along the path it would have come from. Just the floodlights, bright, fixed in place. No movement, no obstruction. "Rivas," I said again, quieter this time. "Yeah? You sure you've got nothing on thermal?" There was a pause. "Hang on," he said. I heard him tapping at something through the radio. "Negative," he said after a second. "Just you out there." I didn't respond right away. The shadow had stopped moving. It sat there, stretched out across the sand, thin and uneven. Then it started again, slowly pulling back on itself, like it was retracting. I crouched down, reaching out toward it. My hand passed through empty air. The shadow didn't react, didn't change. It just kept moving. I pulled my hand back. "Everything good out there?" Rivas asked. "Yeah," I said automatically, but I didn't sound convinced. I stood up again, stepping back toward the panel. The shadow followed, not directly, but it shifted in the same general direction, staying within that same section of ground. I looked at the fence, chain link, stretched tight between posts. It cast its own shadow, sharp and consistent. This was different. Softer, less defined, like it didn't belong to anything solid. I went back to the panel, finishing the repair as quickly as I could. My hands felt slower than usual, clumsier. I kept checking the ground. The shadow never left. It just kept doing that same pattern. Stretch, pause, contract, slide, over and over. When I finally closed the panel and stood up, it was still there. Same place, same movement. "Done?" Rivas asked. "Yeah," I said. I packed up my tools, keeping my eyes on the ground the whole time. The shadow drifted slightly to the left, then back again, like it was staying within a boundary I couldn't see. I took a few steps back toward the truck. The shadow didn't follow. It stayed where it was. Still moving, still changing. I stopped, watching it from a distance. "Let's go," Rivas said over the radio. "Yeah," I replied. I walked the rest of the way back without looking back again. When I got to the truck, I climbed in and shut the door. "Everything good?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. He nodded, starting the engine. As we pulled away, I glanced out the window toward the section of fence. The floodlights were steady now, no flickering. The ground looked normal, flat, empty, no shadow. I didn't say anything. The next night, I checked the maintenance logs. No issues reported in that section. No follow-ups. I pulled up the camera feeds, standard coverage. Thermal showed nothing but the usual temperature differences in the ground. No movement, no anomalies. I didn't mention it to anyone. Didn't write it up. There wasn't anything to write. Every now and then, I get sent back out to that same stretch. Same lights, same fence, same flat sand. I still check the ground when I'm out there, just in case. But I haven't seen it again. Not yet. I noticed it because it wasn't moving when everything else was. Night shifts in the radar room were usually slow. You spent most of the time watching patterns repeat, planes following routes, occasional training flights cutting across restricted sectors, the usual background noise that never really changed. I'd been there a couple years by then, long enough that you start recognizing what normal looks like without thinking about it. That night, the wind at altitude was strong. You could see it in the drift of high returns, the way certain readings smeared slightly in one direction over time. It wasn't anything unusual, just one of those nights where the upper air currents were pushing everything east. Everything except this one return. It showed up just after midnight. At first I thought it was a glitch, a faint blip, high up, almost at the edge of our effective range. I leaned closer to the screen, adjusting the gain slightly. The signal sharpened, small, clean, stationary. I frowned, tapping the console lightly. "Come on," I muttered. Sometimes you get ghost returns, reflections bouncing off layers of atmosphere, stray signals that don't correspond to anything real. They usually flicker, fade in and out, shift slightly. This didn't. It held steady. I checked the altitude estimate. High, higher than anything we normally tracked. I ran a quick cross-check against transponder data. Nothing. No identification, no flight plan, no matching signal. "All right," I said quietly. I logged the initial detection, marking it as unidentified. Standard procedure. Then I waited. If it was a glitch, it would disappear. If it was an aircraft, it would move. 5 minutes passed, the return didn't change. Same position, same intensity. I checked the wind data again, just to be sure. Strong lateral movement at that altitude. Anything up there should have drifted. This didn't. It sat directly over the base, unmoving. I keyed the internal line. "Hey, you seeing anything unusual up top tonight?" I asked. A guy named Kessler answered. "Define unusual." "High altitude return, no transponder, holding position." There was a pause. "Negative," he said. "I've got clear air." I glanced back at my screen. The return was still there. "Check again," I said. Another pause. "Nothing," he repeated. "You sure it's not noise?" "Doesn't look like it." I hung up, staring at the display. I adjusted the settings again, filtering out lower-level clutter. The return stayed, unchanged. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my eyes, then I looked again. Still there. 10 minutes in, it started to feel less like a glitch and more like something I couldn't explain. It wasn't just stationary, it was perfectly stationary. No drift, no wobble, no variation in signal strength, like it was locked in place. I opened a secondary display, pulling up historical data for comparison. Everything else showed expected movement. Only that one return stayed fixed. 15 minutes. Still there. I checked the time. 12:17 a.m. I logged another note. Object maintaining fixed position. No lateral movement despite wind conditions. I hesitated before typing that last part. It sounded wrong even as I wrote it. At around the 20-minute mark, I started noticing something else. The signal wasn't fluctuating at all. Even distant aircraft usually show slight variations. Minor changes in return strength as angles shift, as atmospheric conditions vary. This didn't. It was consistent. Flat. Like a constant value. I tapped the screen lightly, as if that would somehow make it change. "Move," I said under my breath. It didn't. I stood up, stretching, walking a few steps around the room. When I came back, it was still there, exactly where I'd left it. I checked the timestamp again, 12:24, 23 minutes since initial detection. Then, without warning, it disappeared. Not gradually, not fading out, just gone. One frame it was there, next frame, nothing. I leaned forward, scanning the surrounding area. No sign of it, no movement away from the position, no trace, just empty space. I sat there for a second, staring at the spot where it had been. Then I checked the system logs. The data should have still been there. The recorded track, the timestamps, everything. I pulled up the file. It was there, but it wasn't what I expected. Instead of an unidentified object entry, the file was labeled Calibration Test. I frowned, scrolling through it. The timestamps matched, the duration matched, but the description had changed. No mention of a real object. Just a note indicating system calibration at high altitude. I leaned back, confused. We didn't run calibration tests like that. Not during active monitoring, and not without notification. I checked the schedule. No calibration was listed for that time. I opened the earlier logs. The initial entry I'd made was still there, but the object classification had been overwritten. I scrolled through the data again. Everything lined up with what I'd seen, except the label. I picked up the phone, dialing Kessler again. "Hey," I said when he answered. "You run any calibration tests tonight?" "Negative," he said. "Why?" "I've got a file here marked calibration, but I don't remember running anything." There was a pause. "Which system?" "Primary radar," I said. Another pause. "Not on my end," he said. "You sure it's not scheduled?" "Checked already, nothing listed." He didn't respond right away. "Probably just a system update," he said finally. "Maybe," I said, but it didn't sound convincing. I hung up, staring at the screen again. The return was gone. The data was there, but reclassified. Everything looked normal now, like nothing unusual had happened. I sat there for the rest of the shift, watching the sky the way I always did. Everything moved like it should. Everything behaved normally. But every now and then, I found myself looking back at that spot, the exact point where the object had been, waiting to see if it would show up again. It didn't, at least not that night. But the next time I saw a faint return at that altitude, something small, something still, I didn't assume it was a glitch anymore. I noticed it when I leaned on it to tie my boot. It wasn't hot enough to burn or anything, just wrong. Like when you touch a car hood that's been sitting in the sun too long, except we were inside a warehouse with no windows and the AC running. I pulled my hand back and touched it again, slower this time. Still warm. I stood there for a second, looking at the crate like I expected it to explain itself. Row after row of them, all identical. Matte gray, reinforced corners, standard locking bars. The kind of stuff you don't think twice about after a while. My job was just to wipe them down, log serial numbers if they were visible, and move on. Most of them felt like they should. Cool, or at least neutral. This one didn't. I pressed my palm flat against it. Warm, steady. Not fading. "Hey, Luis," I called out. His voice came back from somewhere down the aisle. "Yeah? Come here a second." He walked over, dragging a rag along the side of another crate as he came. "What?" I stepped aside. "Touch this." He gave me a look. "Why?" "Just do it." He sighed and put his hand against the metal. Then he paused. "Okay," he said slowly. "Right?" I said. He pressed harder, like that would change it. "That's weird. Everything else is cold." He moved his hand to the crate next to it. "Yeah, this one's normal." Then back to the warm one. "This isn't." We both stood there for a second, like not really sure what to do with it. "Maybe it was just moved in," he said. "From where?" I asked. "It's been sitting here since the start of the shift." He shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe something inside holds heat." "There's no power hooked up," I said, pointing to the floor. "No cables, no connections. Just the crates sitting on bare concrete." Luis tapped the side lightly with his knuckles. It sounded solid, same as the others. "Feels like it's on, though," he said. That was the thing I couldn't quite explain. It didn't just feel warm, it felt active, like there was something going on inside, even if there wasn't any noise or movement. I leaned in closer. The air around it felt different. Not hot, exactly, just thicker, like the pressure changed a little. "You feel that?" I said. Luis leaned in too. "What?" "Just right here." He stood there for a second, then shifted back. "Yeah," he said. "That's weird. It reminded me of the air before a storm, even back when I lived in Arizona. That kind of static feeling, like everything was about to snap. Except we were indoors, no storms, no weather, just a sealed warehouse." I checked the label on the side of the crate. It was there, but it didn't say much, just a code and a barcode. No description, no origin. "Doesn't say anything," I said. Luis shrugged again. "Half this stuff doesn't." I wiped the side of it with my rag, more out of habit than anything. The cloth dragged slightly, like the surface had a bit more resistance than the others, not enough to be obvious, just enough that I noticed. "Feels different too," I said. Luis didn't respond. He was staring at it now. "You hear anything?" I paused, listened. At first, nothing. Then, maybe something. It was faint, so faint I wasn't sure if I was imagining it. A low, almost inaudible sound. Not a hum exactly. More like a vibration you could barely hear. "Yeah," I said slowly. "I think so." We both leaned in a little closer. The sound didn't get louder, it just stayed at the same barely there level, like it wasn't meant to be heard from outside. Luis stepped back first. "Man, I don't like that," he said. I didn't either, but I couldn't really say why. It wasn't doing anything. Just sitting there, warm, quiet, wrong. "We should probably just keep going," he said. "Yeah," I said. We moved on to the next row, but I kept glancing back at it. Every time it looked the same. No movement, no change. Just sitting there in the middle of everything else. About 20 minutes later, I noticed something else. The lights above that section were dimmer. Not by much. Just enough that the row looked slightly darker than the others. I walked back over. The crate was still warm, still giving off that same subtle feeling in the air. The faint sound was still there too. Luis stayed where he was. "You going back to it?" he called. "Just checking something." I looked up at the lights. They flickered once, not a full flicker, just a quick dip, then back to normal. I looked back at the crate, still unchanged. I reached out and touched it again. Same warmth, same steady temperature, no sign of cooling. I pressed my ear lightly against the side. The sound was clearer that way, still faint, still hard to define, but definitely there, a low, continuous vibration. Not mechanical, not like any machine I'd heard before, more like a tone that didn't quite stay in one place. I pulled back. "Okay," I said quietly. That was enough for me. I went back to Luis, and we finished the rest of the shift without mentioning it again. Neither of us wanted to be the one to bring it up. When we clocked out, I took one last look down that aisle. The crate was still there. Same spot, same as before. I came in the next day a little earlier than usual. I don't know why. Just wanted to see if it was still there. It wasn't. The entire section had been rearranged, not just that crate. The whole row. Different crates in different positions, like someone had come through overnight and shifted everything around. I walked down the aisle slowly, checking each one. None of them were warm. None of them had that feeling in the air. Nothing out of place. I found Luis near the back. "Hey," I said, "that crate from yesterday." He cut me off. "Yeah," he said, "it's gone." "You noticed too?" "First thing." We both stood there for a second. "Did you say anything to anyone?" I asked. He shook his head. "No? You?" "No." He nodded. "Good." We went back to work. No one mentioned it. No one asked about it. And as far as I could tell, it never showed up again. But every now and then, when I'm working a quiet shift and everything's still, I catch myself pausing near certain crates, not touching them right away, just standing there for a second, waiting to feel that same warmth again. It started with the cattle bunching up. I'd been running that stretch of land outside Rachel for years. Same routine every day, same patterns. You get used to how animals behave out there. They wander, they spread out, they settle when the sun drops. Nothing dramatic. That night, they didn't spread out. I noticed it just after dusk. I was out by the fence line checking a loose post, and I could see them all grouped together farther out than usual, maybe a couple 100 yards from where they normally bed down, all facing the same direction. At first, I figured something spooked them. Coyotes, maybe. It happens. They'll cluster up, keep their heads pointed toward whatever's bothering them, but usually there's movement, shifting, noise. That night, they were still, just standing there tight together, all looking toward the same part of the horizon, toward the base. I climbed back into the truck and drove out toward them, headlights bouncing over the dirt. As I got closer, they didn't scatter like they usually do. They just adjusted slightly, still facing that same direction. I slowed to a stop about 50 feet away and killed the engine. The silence out there at night is something you feel more than here. No traffic, no wind that night, just open desert. The cattle made low noises, restless, but they didn't move off. "What's got you like this?" I said, stepping out. I walked a little closer. Their ears were forward, eyes fixed. Not on me, past me. I turned and looked the same way they were. Nothing at first. Just the dark outline of the distant hills and the faint glow you always get out there from the facility, even when you're miles away. It's not bright, just enough that the horizon goes completely black. I stood there for a minute, waiting for something to show itself. Then one of the cows shifted and let out a low, uneasy sound. Another followed, still not moving away, just reacting to something I couldn't see. I started to feel that same kind of tension you get before a storm, even though the sky was clear. I took a few steps farther out, away from the truck. That's when I noticed the first pulse. It was faint, so faint I almost missed it. A quick flicker of light far out toward the horizon. Not bright enough to light anything up around it. Just a brief flash. I squinted, trying to focus on where it had come from. Then it happened again, same spot, same intensity. A quick pulse like someone turning a light on and off for a split second. I glanced back at the cattle. Their eyes caught it better than mine did. For a moment, all those dark shapes had tiny reflections in their eyes, faint points of light. Then it was gone again, turned back toward the horizon, "Okay," I said quietly. Another pulse. This time I counted 1, 2, 3, then another flash, same timing. Steady, even, like something on a fixed interval. I pulled my phone out, tried to aim it toward where I was seeing it. The screen barely picked anything up, just darkness and grain. I lowered it and watched with my own eyes instead. The pulses kept coming, every few seconds. Same spot, same brightness. Not moving, not spreading, just appearing and disappearing. I started to feel like I shouldn't be standing out there watching it, not for any clear reason. Just a feeling, like I was somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. The cattle shifted again, tighter this time. One of them tried to move away, then stopped, turning back to face the light, like they couldn't decide whether to run or stay. I stepped backward slowly toward the truck. The pulses continued. I kept counting without meaning to. 1, 2, 3, flash. 1, 2, 3, flash. It went on like that for a while, long enough that I lost track of time. The sky above stayed completely clear. No aircraft, no sound, nothing to explain it. Then, without warning, it stopped. No fade, no slowing, just nothing. The horizon went back to that faint, constant glow. The cattle didn't relax right away. They stayed facing that direction for another minute or two, like they were waiting for it to start again. Then slowly they began to break formation. A few turned away, others followed. Within a couple minutes they were spreading out again, moving back toward their usual spots. Like whatever had held their attention was gone. I stood there a while longer, staring at the same spot. Nothing came back. Eventually I got back in the truck and drove home. Didn't think much of it at first, just chalked it up as something I couldn't explain. But it happened again. Not the next night, not even the next week. But a few weeks later, same thing. Cattle bunching up, all facing that direction. Same faint tension in the air, same pulses of light, steady and even. Always at night, always clear skies, and always stopping the same way. Instantly. I started noticing something else too. On those nights, the radio in the truck would get weird. Static creeping in, even on strong stations. Sometimes a low hum underneath the signal, almost too low to notice unless you were paying attention. If I drove closer toward where I thought the pulses were coming from, the hum would fade. Not get stronger, fade. Like I was moving away from it instead of toward it. That part didn't make sense to me. Nothing about it really did. Now, whenever I see the cattle start to bunch up like that, I don't go out as far anymore. I stay closer to the truck. Watch from a distance. Wait for the first pulse, and every time it starts, I find myself counting again without meaning to. I saw the scratches before anyone told me anything about them. The aircraft had come in late, sometime after midnight. I wasn't on shift when it landed, but I got called in early the next morning because they wanted a quick turnaround inspection before it went back out. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was how quiet everyone was when I got there. Usually there's some chatter, even on classified projects. People talking around things, making jokes they probably shouldn't. That morning, nobody was saying much. I met Carson at the hangar door. He handed me the clipboard without looking up. Underside check, he said. Full sweep. Something specific? I asked. He hesitated. Just take a look. That was it. No details. No heads up. I walked under the aircraft with a light and a rag, same as always. It was one of the test platforms I'd worked on before. Nothing new to me. Sleek body, composite skin, everything designed to reduce drag and signature. At first glance, it looked fine. No obvious damage. No dents. No burn marks. I started at the nose section, working my way back, checking seams, panels, intake edges, everything normal. Then I got to the midsection. That's where I saw them. They were faint at first. Thin lines running along the underside, barely visible unless the light hit them at the right angle. I adjusted the flashlight, angling it sideways. More lines appeared. Dozens of them, all running roughly in the same direction, front to back. I crouched down a little, bringing the light closer. They weren't surface dirt. They were cuts, not deep, but definite. I reached out and ran a finger across one. It caught slightly on the edge. Okay, I said under my breath. I moved the light further along. The scratches continued, not random either. They were too consistent. Parallel in places, crossing slightly in others, but always following the same general direction. Like something had brushed along the entire underside. I stood up, stepping back a bit to take in the full length. From where I was, I could see them stretching from just behind the nose gear all the way to the rear. Carson, I called. He walked over slowly. What? I pointed the light up. You seen this? He looked for a second, then nodded once. Yeah, that wasn't there before, I said. No, he said. I waited for him to say more. He didn't. What did it hit? I asked. He shook his head. Nothing reported. I frowned. You don't get this without hitting something. That's what I said, he replied. I crouched back down, looking closer at one of the deeper lines. The edges were clean, too clean. If it had been sand or debris at high speed, I'd expect more irregularity. Chipping, pitting, something like that. This looked precise, like something hard had dragged across it. I took a rag and wiped along one of the marks. No residue, no discoloration. Just the exposed surface where the finish had been cut. You checked for debris? I asked. Nothing, Carson said. Not on landing gear, not in intakes. I moved further back, checking the rear section. Same pattern, same direction, consistent across the whole underside. Altitude? I asked. High, he said. Same as usual for that run, I nodded slowly. Up there, there's not supposed to be anything. No birds, no debris, just air. I stood up again, stepping out from under the aircraft. Pilot say anything? Carson shook his head. No impact, no turbulence, nothing. That doesn't make sense. Yeah. We stood there for a moment, both looking at the aircraft. Then he said, just log it. They'll decide what to do. I went back under and started documenting. Length of scratches, density, depth where I could measure it. The more I looked, the less it made sense. Some of the lines were slightly curved, like whatever made them had flexed or shifted. Others were perfectly straight. A few overlapped in ways that didn't match a single pass, like multiple contact points had happened at once. I finished the inspection and handed the report off. Didn't hear anything about it the rest of the day, but I kept thinking about it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured the underside of that aircraft. All those lines, too uniform to be random, too irregular to be manufactured. The next day, I came in early again. The aircraft was gone, not moved to another hangar. Gone. I found Carson near the back offices. Where'd it go? I asked. He didn't look surprised I was asking. Pulled, he said. For what? He shrugged. Further evaluation. I nodded, but it didn't sit right. Did they say what caused it? He shook his head. I hesitated, then asked, you ever seen anything like that before? He looked at me for a second, then said, no. But he didn't say it like he meant it, more like he didn't want to say anything else. I let it go. For a while. A few weeks later, I was working on a different aircraft, routine maintenance, nothing unusual. I was under it, running checks along the same areas when I noticed something small. A single line, faint, barely visible, running along the underside. I froze for a second, then moved the light closer. It looked like the start of a scratch. Not deep, not fresh, but there. I ran my finger over it. Same slight catch, same clean edge. I stood up quickly, stepping back. Hey, I called to one of the other guys. This one come in recently? Yesterday. Hey, why? Just asking. I didn't say anything else. I finished the inspection, logged it as normal wear. Didn't mention the line. I don't know why. Maybe because I didn't want to hear the answer, or because I wasn't sure there was one. Now, every time I work on one of those aircraft, I check the underside first. Most of the time, there's nothing. Just smooth panels exactly how they should be. But every now and then, I see one. A single line or two. Always faint, always easy to miss, like whatever made them didn't always leave a full mark. And I find myself wondering how close they got to whatever it was before anyone noticed. I noticed it when I was going through the photos, not when I took them. That's what bothered me the most. I'd been out there a dozen times before, setting up along the same stretch of dirt road outside Rachel. You get a clean view of the sky, almost no light pollution, and if you angle things right, you can catch the glow from the base sitting low on the horizon. It was a warm night, no wind, just that dry desert air that makes everything feel sharper than it should. I set up around 10:30, tripod locked in, camera pointed slightly south toward the horizon. Long exposures, 30 seconds each, just letting the sky build itself in the frame. At the time, everything looked normal. Stars clear, no clouds, no aircraft crossing the shot. I stayed out there for maybe 2 hours, just cycling through exposures, checking focus, adjusting angles a little. Nothing unusual, no strange lights, no movement that stood out. Around midnight, I packed up and headed back. Didn't think about it again until the next morning. I loaded the images onto my laptop, started going through them one by one. Most of them were exactly what I expected. Clean star fields, faint glow on the horizon, a couple of distant streaks that could have been satellites. Then I hit one that made me pause. At first, I thought it was a glitch. There was something faint in the upper part of the frame. Barely visible, like a pattern. I zoomed in. It looked like lines, straight lines, intersecting at angles that didn't match anything natural. I leaned closer to the screen, adjusting the contrast. The pattern became clearer. A grid, not perfect, not solid, but there, like a faint overlay across the sky. Transparent enough that you could still see the stars through it, but structured in a way that didn't belong. I scrolled to the next image. Nothing, just normal sky. I went back. The grid was there again, same position, same faint lines. I checked the timestamp, 30 seconds between frames. I flipped back and forth a few times. One frame, grid. Next frame, gone. No transition, no fading, just there, then not. I sat back, staring at the screen. Okay, I said quietly. I went through the rest of the set. Out of maybe 50 shots, I found it in 3. Always in the same part of the sky. Always faint. Always gone in the next frame. I zoomed in further, trying to make sense of it. The lines weren't random. They formed a kind of pattern, like a mesh stretched across part of the sky. But it wasn't perfectly aligned with anything. Not the horizon, not the stars. It just existed there. I checked for artifacts, lens flare, sensor issues, anything that could explain it. Nothing matched. I even opened the raw files, thinking maybe it was something introduced during processing. The grid was there too. I sat there for a long time, going back and forth between frames. The more I looked, the less it felt like a mistake. It was too consistent, too structured, but also too faint to have noticed in real time. I tried to remember if I'd seen anything while I was out there. Anything at all. I hadn't. The sky had looked completely normal. That's what stuck with me. If it was something real, something physical, I should have seen it, even faintly. But I didn't. A couple days later, I went back out. Same spot, same setup. This time, I paid more attention, not just to the camera, but to the sky itself. It was cooler that night, a slight breeze moving through. The air felt different. Not bad, just off, like something was shifting overhead that I couldn't see. I set up again, started shooting. Long exposure, same as before. Every now and then, I'd look up between shots trying to catch anything unusual. Nothing, just stars. I checked the first few images on the camera screen. They looked normal, no sign of the grid. Maybe it was a fluke, I said to myself. But I kept shooting anyway. About an hour in, I noticed something else. The camera started lagging, nothing dramatic, just a slight delay between shots. I checked the battery, still had plenty left. I swapped it out anyway, just in case. The new one drained faster than it should have. I watched the percentage drop more quickly than I'd ever seen. Come on, I muttered. I pulled out a third battery. Same thing. It didn't die instantly, just drained. Faster, like something was pulling more power than normal. I looked around, half expecting to see something causing interference. Nothing. No lights, no vehicles. Just open desert and sky. I kept shooting. Partly because I wanted to catch that grid again, partly because I didn't want to pack up and leave without understanding what was happening. After another 30 minutes, the camera shut off. Battery dead. I checked the spare. Also dead. That shouldn't have happened. Not that fast. I stood there for a second, holding the camera, not sure what to do next. The sky above still looked completely normal, clear, still, nothing out of place. I packed up slowly, glancing up every few seconds, waiting to see something, anything. Nothing showed. When I got home, I charged the batteries again. They behaved normally. No issues, no signs of damage. The next day, I loaded the new photos onto my laptop, went through them carefully, frame by frame. I didn't find the grid this time. Not in any of them, just normal sky. But there was something else. In a couple of the shots, the stars in that same section looked slightly off. Not missing, not blurred, just dimmer. Like something had passed in front of them, but only partially. It wasn't enough to be obvious. If I hadn't been looking for it, I wouldn't have noticed. I went back to the original set, the ones with the grid, compared the positions. It lined up. Same area of the sky. Same rough shape. I closed the laptop and just sat there for a while. I haven't been back out there since. Not because I'm scared, exactly. More because I don't know what I'd do if I saw it again. Or worse, if I didn't see it, but it was still there. It started as a faint tapping I almost ignored. Night shifts inside the interior corridors were usually quiet. Not peaceful exactly, just empty. Long stretches of concrete and steel, fluorescent lights humming overhead, everything echoing a little more than it should. I was halfway through my patrol when I heard it the first time. 3 quick taps, then silence. I stopped walking, listening. Nothing. I figured it was just something settling, metal shifting, pipes knocking, one of those normal sounds you stop noticing after a while. I kept moving. A few seconds later, it came again. 3 taps, same spacing, same volume. I slowed down this time, turning my head slightly toward the hangar doors along the corridor. There were 6 of them in that section, all sealed. No scheduled activity listed for any of them that night. I stood there, waiting. The tapping didn't come right away. I was about to move on again when tap, tap, tap. Exactly the same. Not louder, not softer, just precise. I walked toward the nearest door, boots echoing lightly against the floor. The closer I got, the quieter everything else felt, like the air itself was holding still. I stopped about 10 feet from the door. Nothing. I took another step. Tap, tap. tap. It came from inside, not the door itself. Behind it, I frowned, looking at the access panel beside the frame. The indicator was red, secured. No activity logged. Hello? I said, not really expecting a response. Nothing. I stepped closer until I was right in front of the door, pressed my hand lightly against the surface. Cold, solid, no vibration. I leaned in slightly, trying to hear it. For a few seconds, there was nothing. Then, tap, tap, tap. Clearer this time. Close enough that it felt like it was just on the other side. I pulled back, my stomach tightening a little. It didn't sound like machinery. It didn't sound random. It sounded intentional. Like someone knocking. But not on the door. Somewhere deeper inside. I stepped back and reached for my radio. Control, this is Harris, I said. I'm at Corridor C, Hangar 3, hearing intermittent noise from inside. Can you confirm scheduled activity? There was a pause. Negative, Harris. The voice came back. No scheduled operations in that section. Copy, I said, requesting a second unit. Stand by. I kept my eyes on the door while I waited. The tapping didn't come again right away. The silence stretched, long enough that I started to doubt what I'd heard. Then tap, tap, tap. Same pattern, same spacing. I counted without meaning to. 1, 2, 3, pause. Then nothing. I glanced down the corridor, still empty. The lights buzzed softly overhead. Everything looked normal. Too normal. How far out is backup? I asked into the radio. 2 minutes, came the reply. I nodded to myself, even though no one could see it. I shifted my weight, stepping a little to the side, like that would somehow give me a better angle to hear. The door didn't move. The panel stayed red. Everything stayed exactly the same, except for that sound. It came again. Tap, tap, tap. I leaned closer this time, pressing my ear lightly against the metal. The sound felt sharper that way, more defined, still soft, still controlled, not like someone banging or trying to get attention. Just tapping, deliberate, measured. I pulled back slowly. Okay, I muttered. My chest felt tight, like I'd been holding my breath without realizing it. I tried to think of explanations. Loose fixture, thermal expansion, anything. But none of those sounded like that. None of them repeated in clean sets of 3. I heard footsteps approaching from behind me. Relief hit faster than I expected. I turned to see Ramirez coming down the corridor. What have you got? He asked. I gestured toward the door. You hear anything? He stepped closer, listening. For a second, nothing happened. Then tap, tap, tap. His expression changed slightly. Yeah, he said. Been doing that for the past few minutes, I said. Same pattern every time. He glanced at the access panel. No activity logged? Nothing. He stepped up beside me, putting his hand on the door. Feels normal, he said. No vibration? I asked. He shook his head. We both stood there, waiting. The tapping didn't come again right away. The silence stretched longer this time. Ramirez looked at me. You sure it's not tap, tap, tap? It cut him off. We both turned back to the door. Same sound, same spacing. All right, he said quietly. He reached for his radio. Control, we've got audible noise confirmed at Hangar 3, requesting clearance to access. There was a pause on the line. Longer than before. Stand by, came the reply. We waited. No tapping, no movement, just the hum of the lights. After what felt like too long, the radio came back. Negative on access, the voice said. Hold position. Ramirez frowned. Copy. He lowered the radio, looking at me. Hold position, I said. He shrugged slightly. We both turned back toward the door, waiting, listening. Nothing happened. The tapping didn't come again, not for a while. We stood there for maybe 5 minutes. 10. I lost track. No sound, no change. Just that sealed door in front of us. Finally, Ramirez exhaled slowly. Maybe it stopped. Yeah, I said. But it didn't feel like it had stopped. It felt like it had decided to stop. We stayed there a few minutes longer, just in case. Nothing else happened. Eventually, Control told us to resume patrol. No further action. No explanation. We walked away, both of us glancing back once or twice. The door stayed closed. The panel stayed red. Everything looked exactly the same as before. Later, when I checked the logs, there was no mention of the incident. No record of the call. No note about the request for access. Just a normal shift report. I asked Ramirez about it before we clocked out. You still hear it? I said. He shook his head. No. Think it'll happen again? He paused, then said, I don't know. Neither of us brought it up again after that. But now, whenever I pass that section of corridor, I slow down without thinking, not stopping, just enough to listen. And every time I do, I catch myself waiting for those 3 taps. I noticed it because the numbers dipped and came right back. At first, I thought it was just a bad read. We had a small monitoring station set up outside of Rachel, not on base, but close enough that we could track localized conditions across that part of the desert. Most of what I did was routine: wind patterns, pressure trends, temperature shifts, the kind of stuff that usually behaved exactly the way it should. That afternoon was steady. Hot, dry, barely any wind. The kind of weather that doesn't really change much over hours. I was halfway through logging hourly data when I saw the pressure drop. Not much, just a quick dip on the graph. Then it snapped right back to where it had been. I stared at the screen for a second. I said quietly, "Sometimes sensors glitch. Dust gets in places it shouldn't, heat messes with readings, things drift out of calibration." I made a note of it and kept going. About 20 minutes later, it happened again. Same thing, a sharp, clean drop, then an immediate return. I leaned forward this time, watching the live feed. "Come on," I muttered. I checked the surrounding sensors. Nothing. Pressure at nearby stations stayed steady. Only that one section showed the dip. I pulled up the map overlay. The affected area sat right over a portion of the base. I frowned. Localized pressure drop, I said to myself. No wind shift, no temperature change. That didn't make sense. Pressure changes like that don't happen in isolation, not without something causing them. I checked satellite data, clear skies, no cloud cover, no storm activity within hundreds of miles. I leaned back, crossing my arms. All right, I logged the second event, marking it as anomalous. Then I waited. The rest of the afternoon passed without anything else happening. By evening, I'd almost convinced myself it was just a sensor issue, but I recalibrated the system anyway. Checked connections, ran diagnostics, everything came back normal. That night, I stayed later than usual, partly because I had nothing else going on, partly because I wanted to see if it would happen again. Around 9:30 it did. This time I was watching when it happened. The pressure line dropped, fast, not gradual, like something pushed down on it and let go. Then it snapped back. Duration maybe 2 seconds. No change in any other readings, no wind, no temperature shift, nothing. I zoomed in on the graph, checking the shape of the drop. It was clean, too clean. No noise, no fluctuation, just a straight dip and return. Okay, that's not normal, I said out loud. I checked the timestamp, 9:31. I waited. 5 minutes, 10, nothing. Then, at 9:37, it happened again. Same pattern, same duration. I felt something tighten in my chest. That wasn't random, that was timing. I grabbed a notebook and started writing down the exact seconds. 9:31, 9:37, 6 minutes apart. I watched the clock. At 9:43, I was already focused on the screen, waiting. Nothing happened. I frowned. All right. Then at 9:44, a minute late, the pressure dropped again. Same way, same sharp dip. Then back. I tapped the pen against the desk. Not consistent, I said, but it was still too close to be coincidence. I pulled up a broader data set, checking historical records for anything similar. Nothing. No previous events matching that pattern. I stood up, walking to the window. From where I was, I could see the desert stretching out toward the base. Dark, flat, nothing moving. The sky was completely clear, stars sharp and bright. No clouds, no aircraft, no visible disturbances. I went back to the console. Another drop, 9:51. I didn't even need to look at the graph anymore. I could tell by the way the line moved. Sharp down, sharp up. I leaned closer to the screen, watching the numbers update in real time. The pressure dipped again. For a split second, the room felt off. I couldn't explain it. Not a sound, not a movement, just a subtle shift, like the air had changed density for an instant. Then it was gone. I sat there, staring at the monitor. Did I just imagine that? I asked quietly. I checked the readings again. Same as before, localized drop. No spread, no ripple effect. Just that one section. I pulled up the satellite feed again, zooming in as much as I could. Clear skies, no thermal anomalies, no cloud formation, nothing. The next drop came at 9:58. This time, I felt it again. That same brief sensation, like the air around me compressed slightly, then released. It wasn't strong. If I hadn't been paying attention, I would have missed it. But it was there. I pushed my chair back, standing up slowly. The room was quiet. The equipment hummed softly. Everything looked normal, except for the data. I grabbed my radio. "Station to control," I said. "You seeing any unusual pressure activity over your sector?" There was a pause. "Negative," the voice came back. "Conditions normal." I hesitated. Copy, I said. I didn't mention the dips, didn't mention the timing. I wasn't sure how to explain it without sounding like I didn't know what I was doing. The next drop came at 10:05, same as before. Same clean dip, same quick return, and that same brief feeling in the air. I stepped outside this time, stood just beyond the doorway looking out toward the desert. The night air felt still, no wind, no temperature shift, nothing obvious. I watched the horizon, waited. At 10:12, I felt it again, that slight pressure change, barely noticeable, but real. I looked toward the base, nothing. No lights changing, no movement, no sound, just the same quiet stretch of desert. I went back inside, checking the graph. Another dip, perfectly aligned with what I'd felt. I didn't stay much longer after that. Logged the data, saved the files, shut everything down. The next morning, I pulled up the records to review them again. The dips were still there, same timestamps, same pattern, but the notes I'd written alongside them were gone. Not deleted entirely, just missing. The data remained, but the annotations I'd added during the night shift weren't in the file anymore. I checked the backup. Same thing. Data intact. No notes. I sat there staring at the screen. Then I looked at the graph one more time. Everything after 10:05 looked normal. No more dips. No anomalies. Just a steady line, like nothing had happened at all. Now, every time I monitor that sector, I keep an eye on the pressure line. Most nights, it stays flat, exactly how it should. But every now and then, I catch myself watching the clock, waiting to see if it drops again. I saw it when I stepped out to stretch my legs. I'd been parked along that stretch of the highway for about an hour, waiting out a delay. It was late past midnight, and the road was dead quiet. No traffic, no wind, nothing but that low hum you get from the desert at night. I leaned against the side of the truck, rolling my shoulders, trying to wake myself up a little. That's when I noticed something moving down the road. At first, I thought it was another vehicle coming up from behind. Just a dark shape low on the horizon, drifting toward me. But there were no headlights. I squinted, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't moving fast, just gliding. Too smooth, too steady. I stepped away from the truck, walking a few feet closer to the road. The shape got clearer as it approached. It was low, lower than any aircraft should have been over that stretch. Maybe 50, 60 feet off the ground, and still no lights. No sound. Nothing. I stood there, watching it come closer. Okay, I said quietly. The shape was long, not wide like a plane, more like something stretched out, smooth on the bottom. I couldn't see any edges clearly, just a dark form against the slightly lighter sky. It moved over the road like it belonged there. No wobble, no drift, just a straight, steady glide. I expected to hear something. Engines, rotors, anything. There was nothing. Even the air felt still, like the sound had been turned off. As it got closer, I realized how big it was. Not massive like a building, but bigger than anything that should have been moving that low without making noise. My first thought was drone, but it didn't fit. Too large, too quiet, too smooth. I took a few more steps forward without really thinking about it. The object passed directly over the road, maybe 100 yards in front of me. I could see the underside better now. Flat, uniform. No visible parts, no lights, just a dark surface that didn't reflect much of anything. It didn't block out the stars completely either. They dimmed slightly as it passed, like it was there but not fully solid. That part didn't make sense to me. I found myself holding my breath, watching it, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. It just kept moving, slow, controlled. Then it started to bank, not sharply, just a gentle shift in direction like it was adjusting course. It turned toward the mountains off to the side of the road. The movement was smooth, no change in speed, no sign of effort, just a gradual curve. I turned with it, keeping it in sight. "Hey," I said out loud, not even sure why. It didn't react, didn't change. It just continued gliding toward the ridgeline. As it moved away, I expected it to disappear behind the mountains, but it didn't drop, didn't climb. It stayed at the same height, same steady pace, until it reached the edge of the ridge. Then it slipped behind it. Gone. Just like that. No sound, no light, nothing left behind. I stood there for a while after, staring at the spot where it had vanished, waiting to see if it would come back up, or circle around, or do anything at all. It didn't. The desert went back to being quiet. The sky looked normal again, stars sharp and clear. I walked back to the truck slowly, my mind still trying to catch up with what I'd just seen. I got in, sat down, and just stared through the windshield for a bit. The road stretched out in front of me, empty. No signs of anything unusual. I reached for my phone, thinking I should have recorded it, but even if I had, I wasn't sure it would have shown anything. The thing barely showed itself as it was. After a few minutes, I started the engine. The sound felt louder than usual, like the silence from before had been thicker. I pulled back onto the road, heading the same direction it had gone. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I'd see it again, or find something. Anything. The drive was normal, nothing out of place,